Recording in progress.
Good evening. My name is Peter Beardmore. This is the Lunenburg Finance Committee meeting on November 4th, 2021. We are at Town Hall in Lunenburg. I am calling this meeting to order. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. The following information is also provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please join the Zoom application and use webinar ID 872-5484-5959. And the passcode is 378545. You could also join toll-free at 888-475-4499 and enter the same webinar ID, 872-5484-5959, passcode 378545. If you are telephoning in, you can dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting. If you're using a computer or app, you may use the raise hand feature to request to speak, and I will recognize you. Please note that the available Zoom option, broadcasts, and recordings are for the convenience of the public. If there are any technical difficulties, the meeting will continue. If you wish to continue to participate, please report to the location on this notice. We are at Lunenburg Town Hall on Main Street in Lunenburg. The agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. Would everyone please rise for the I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any announcements from the board? No?
Recording in progress.
Please turn your computers to sound off, please, and mute your microphones too if you're going to join the Zoom. Any public comment from the board? Any public comment from the public? Hearing none. Madam Town Manager, do you have a report? Or Madam Finance Director?
Do you want me to Article 3?
Well, if you have regular report items, then report them now. If not, we can open the public hearing and jump right into Article 3.
Other than that, I have no new information.
Okay, fair enough. So with that, I'm going to open the public hearing, but let me say a few things before we open. So tonight's public hearing is a second public hearing for the special town meeting, which will be held on the 16th of this month. Not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday following at Lunenburg Middle High School in the auditorium. The reason that we are conducting a second public hearing this evening is the Finance Committee resolved this summer that we would avail ourselves to public hearings after the warrant is printed in the event that there will be substantial information relevant to warrant articles that were not available at the time of the public hearing. And if every effort were made, of course, to make that information available at the time of the public hearing. In the event of tonight's articles, we'll be hearing Articles 3, 7, and 8. Article 3 relates to a collective bargaining agreement that has been in negotiation with the firefighters union, I believe. And Articles 7 and 8 relate to the warrant articles dealing with TC Passio's building, either rehabilitation or tear down and rebuild opportunities. The way the public hearing will be conducted tonight is that we are going to conduct Article 3 separately, and then we're going to conduct Articles 7 and 8 for purposes of discussion in the public hearing. We will then close the public hearing and we'll discuss and we'll have the opportunity to vote on recommendations to town meeting this evening. And of course, the Finance Committee will have the opportunity during the public hearing to ask questions and to comment, as will members of the public. I think I got it all. Madam Town Manager, Article 3.
Okay. So unfortunately, I do not have a signed MOA with the fire union yet. We're waiting on one piece that's not related to the financial piece that to iron out. So I hope to have that next week, waiting on an answer on something. So, but I can tell you, nothing's changed as far as it will still come out of the salary reserve, so it'll be covered with already appropriated funds. The agreement itself, we approached as we have for other agreements to do compensation analysis with comparable towns. So I can tell you that information. So as soon as that information, I'll obviously release it and try to explain as many details as possible. So that information in advance of town meeting.
Is the, I understand that you're restricted in what you can say here. Obviously, we've had many discussions in the past about the timeliness of these articles.
I tried my hardest.
The opportunity for the opportunity for the Finance Committee as well as voters at town meeting to be able to ask questions and have a conversation about all of the articles. I understand that collective bargaining is somewhat procedural and involves our elected executive board. But that being said, here we are 12 days prior to town meeting and we can't talk about this agreement. Is the nature of the delay related to information that would not otherwise be available, or are we prolonging negotiations?
No, not prolonging negotiations. It's something that the union would need to agree, the language within the agreement, so.
But are we waiting on information external that is not available within the union and the municipal government? Is there an external piece of information that we're waiting on? Or is this something that if the two parties were forced to come together and hammer this out 2 weeks ago, we could have done it?
Something that came up after, we thought we were wrapped up a couple weeks ago, that came up after the last time the select board, we were trying to finalize it then in time for tonight.
Okay. Any questions relating to Article 3?
I guess the only question I would pose, and I understand your position, and this is an assumption and a question just for education. On a collective bargaining agreement, until it's fully signed off, anything could change on it. Even the stuff that you've agreed on up to this point could suddenly be flushed down the toilet if somebody got angry enough. Is that correct?
Well, during negotiations, if you've come, agree on certain provisions during, they should hold till the end. It's not like you can change it at the very, last minute.
Okay.
Any questions or comments from the public on Article 3? Hearing none. Articles 7 and 8. So, Articles 7 and 8 are going to be presented together by Mr. Jeffries. And then we will engage in questions and comments. My ask from the members of this board is that during the public hearing, we make this as much inquiry as possible and try to phrase things for the benefit of dissemination of information. I understand that many of us have strong opinions on this issue. But during the public hearing, that we keep it to questions relating to the article as best we can. I will reserve my privilege during the discussion portion of this to request that the presenter or other members of the public who may have relevant information that may come up in discussion, I will reserve the privilege to bring them back for clarification or additional discussion. And with no further ado, Mr. Jeffries.
Yeah, good evening.
Evening.
Just going ahead and sharing a screen here. Showing up yet? Okay.
Yeah, we have it.
All right, so good evening. I'm at the Tcp Design Committee on Article 7 and also the Select Board on Article 8. So my intention tonight is to review both presentations kind of back to back and then to be available for your questions. So before we get started here, first I do appreciate that there was that you guys are having this public hearing tonight. One of the things that we were up against was that we had a contract with after coming out of the Springtown meeting, $54,000 was allocated for additional design money to do an apples to apples comparison to a new building compared to an old building. Unfortunately, it took a while to get that contract signed, and so that contract was not signed until I believe it was the very end of August, beginning of September, and it was a 60-day contract. I think our expectation was that that would have been signed in about July, and that this would have been wrapped up a lot sooner. So I do appreciate your patience with us on waiting to get these numbers in here tonight. So the first presentation here tonight, can everyone see this okay? All right, great. The first presentation here tonight is, again, on the TCP Design Committee, looking at town, school, and community uses at the location currently occupied by the TC Passios building. All right. So this slide just represents the members of the TCP Design Committee and who is, our current members and also our former members. So this slide represents the scope of work by the committee and also by the architect. That overview of the building. So a couple things were done during this process that started in 2019. Overview of the building's current and present conditions, detailed interviews with town and school departments as well as other groups interested in utilizing the space. We had multiple open meetings conducted to listen and learn about the individual needs of all the interested stakeholders looking for space inside of the building. And we also made some tough decisions for plans to best utilize the present, accommodating as many groups as possible and separating out those different uses. And we also discussed both interior and exterior plans to make sure that traffic flow, parking, access, identification of departments were simple and consistent for the. And the product being a detailed cost analysis as we looked at areas for cost savings throughout the entire project. So this slide depicts the kind of a schematic view of the TCP design renovation with the proposed uses and how that square footage is broken down. And again, the goal being to maximize the available space. I think it's fair to say that when we went into this process, there was an expectation that we were probably going to be tearing down a wing of the building. But when we went through the public outreach portion, which was a big chunk of last summer into the beginning of the fall, there were far more requests for space than space was available. So these next few slides are a little blurry, and we're going to go through them pretty quickly. So on this last slide, what you're looking at, just to orient you back over to this, so the green area to the left, as you come into TC Pass Hills, the green area would be the school swing, the middle portion of the building where we currently have a gym, we also have a kitchen and cafeteria, would remain for different uses. As we go up to the kind of L-shaped portion of the building, it's for IT and for PAC, and then the last wing, the top wing, that's in that purplish looking, it's designated for school and educational type uses. So again, we're going to breeze through as we did the blow up on these slides. They didn't come out great, so we're just going to walk through a couple of these. So what this slide depicts include adding required parking and also improving the traffic flow. So with this design, what you're looking at on the left is as you're looking at TC Passes, there's a kind of a center island with a flagpole, and so in green you're seeing the additional parking that would be added. On the photo on the right, you're looking at an overview of the overall building, and in green you're seeing kind of a wraparound that wraps around the building and to provide additional parking. You also see in here some purplish colors, and these are just walkways that lead toward the building. And on the right-hand side, we have an existing parking lot, and the intent would be for that existing parking lot to remain. So the final estimate for renovation at that time was $22,592,000, and currently we're at $28,966,000. So I want to pause for a second. So when I am a property professional. I think many of you have probably heard me say in other meetings I've been a contractor, a bunch of other stuff. Currently I'm Vice President of Asset Management with Mass Development. So what I do for a living is I manage property and specifically payments of property on residential. Now that focus is commercial. When we look at the makeup of the TCP Design Committee, we also have Mr. Roy, who's in attendance with us tonight, who is an engineer. And so with our experience in the industry as well as the experience of the architect, we were at a price point in about March time period of $334 roughly a square foot. Now typically that is a high cost. Prior to 2021, I think most people would say that when you're building a commercial type building, office space, that your usual square footage cost is somewhere between $250 to $300 a square foot for a new build. And so with our experience as well as the experience of the architect, we recognize that this price per square foot was a bit high. And so that is what prompted us to then say, maybe we should look into a new build. That, if this renovation cost is kind of abnormal, maybe that cost will be within norms. I think that what we probably didn't recognize at that time was that we were picking up on an industry trend. That it wasn't just hey, really expensive renovation, but that we were seeing something that was representative of what is generally happening in the market. And so the point that we're at now, as we look at a $28 million cost escalation, this is in large part due to significant increases in costs over the last year. Now, again, I don't want to delve too far, but there's a couple of things that are in that number. Number one is if you think about people who hasn't done that or some kind of garden project last year, I think very few people have not. All of that has put a decent amount of strain onto the construction industry. Also, even though the price of iron ore is down through government policy, there are tariffs now on steel. There's also been a consolidation. 2018, there were 5 companies that controlled half the steel market in the United States. Now those 5 companies control 80-something% of the market in the United States. So the price of iron ore is actually down. The price of steel is up over 100% for the year, approximately. 100% within the last year, over 100% within the last year. I believe we're at 90-something% for the year. There's been a significant cost increase in gypsum, which affects drywall, also cost increase in concrete. The labor market is also very tight, and we have abnormal inflation. So altogether, these factors factor into why we are seeing a higher dollar amount now. And then at the end of the presentation, actually, I'll just say it now. One of the questions I think naturally is, well, will these costs go down? So what we did was a comparison to the construction cost index. So many people are familiar with the consumer price index, CPI. That's usually 2% a year. The construction cost index averages 4.4% a year when you look back over the last 40 years. And so typically you're seeing a construction cost that already goes up much higher than everything else. And this year it just happens to be quite substantial. So the update since last town meeting, previous slides were previously presented. We discussed, I've already discussed at the spring town meeting, the committee presented the article to investigate the cost of tearing down the present building and doing a new build. The committee contracted with DeGiorgio Associates to do that preliminary or schematic design, rough cost estimate for the purpose of making an intelligent comparison. Several concepts were reviewed to maximize the use and provide as much synergy and ease of use for all departments and community use. And for the new building, a certain number of parking spaces are mandated based on occupancy, so the design would also take into effect that these spaces be available for community uses as well. And then a key point here is having the possibility to expand the building in the future. That was a must. So what we're looking at here is an aerial of what the new build would look like. As you can kind of see underneath, it's a little difficult to identify, but it is kind of showing as well the current footprint of the. So what you see here is a little off compared to the other slides. But what I want to show you here is a couple of things. Number one is the setback of the building is a little bit more. So rather than being as close to the road, it's 15 feet further back. As you look at this map, north is on your right-hand side. So it also, instead of having that wraparound parking all the way around the back of the building, you see a smaller lot closer to what would be a staff entrance. Also, this would be where handicap parking would be located at. And then you see that the concentration of parking is closer to the schools, and that was intentional. If anyone went to homecoming and you saw the parking situation we were in, what this would help do is help provide additional parking for those sporting type events. So this concept, this is a conceptual design, and I want to be clear in identifying that, this layout is not a definitive, this is what we want to do. This is just a conceptual plan that uses the best can come up with in the most cost-effective way. So this building has three different sections. What you see on the left here is what you see in the upper portion, program, those educational purposes, and then in the community space is that bottom right corner. Now, as we look at this, just to kind of give you some orientation to the color scheme, yellow is community, purple is educational use, gray is storage, town storage, and the multicolors are staff offices. So, as you walk into this building where these two lines kind of intersect in the middle of the screen here, as you walk into this building, what you're looking at right ahead of you is a staircase. To your left would be an elevator, and also to your left would also be where all the town offices are located at. On the right-hand side are the community spaces. So that first room to the right, there would be a food pantry there, some storage, but that first big yellow room would essentially replicate this room right here that we're in today. And that room at the very end of the hallway would function as a gym, also as a cafeteria. It's a multi-purpose, multi-use type room. Now, there's also a separate entrance, and we'll get into that in a moment here, but there is a separate entrance for that educational wing of the building. Essentially, this is kind of like two buildings put together into one, and so there's a separate entrance separated from those common areas, so that way the child use, it can be more of a controlled access to get into that portion of the building. The next slide is going to detail kind of what we're looking at here. So this is the second floor. So this is a two-story building. So this next slide represents the second floor. What you see in the upper left portion is the superintendent office suite, or the school office suite. Right across from that in the bottom left corner, you see the town manager office suite. Next to her office is IT. We have some community uses. On the right-hand side is PAC. Just to note, PAC would prefer not to be on the second floor, but again, this is a conceptual plan. And then what you also see is that the educational wing is one floor. Ports, so that way in the future, if you add a second floor, you're not having to do a significant amount of work to get there. And then you also have a very large, over 1,000 square foot mechanical room, and so that's on the first and second floors, and this does two things. The big room on the second floor provides future space. So the first floor, primary building mechanical. Second floor, it's that if there is an expansion at a point in the future, you have designated space right there for those building mechanicals that would be needed. So this next slide just kind of represents in a little more detail this concept. The left side shows the bottom corner. We're looking at town clerk type offices, and again, just multiple different uses. We have building departments down here, conservation, Board of Health, the assessor's office, the treasurer's office, Veterans Affairs, et cetera. And on the side is again the town manager office suite. Assistant town manager, and also we're looking at the IT office area. This next portion is just a little more detail of the office suite for the schools. One of the considerations that we had to make, or that we did make, was that there's a program called the ACE program. Now the ACE program is for children who are, or really they're young adults. So it's kids who graduate high school but still need additional services for kind of learning those ADLs, activities of daily life, just kind of additional skill sets. And so the ACE program, typically it's separate from the rest of the schools. It gives children that kind of idea of, yes, you did graduate, you're no longer necessarily in a school setting, but the program coordinator for this has to be located with this program. And that program coordinator also has multiple other functions within the district, and that speaks to why there was a necessity to co-locate ACE with the school offices. This next slide just depicts, as you look at the top right corner, this just depicts that separate entrance area coming into this. And then we have some designated bathrooms for the children in this area. We also have some staff bathrooms located directly in these rooms. And so this is for a couple of things. So the far end, the extended day program, provides residents in town the ability to have their kids in a safe location before and after school. It definitely is a critical program. We also have Community Link and also Early Access. These are grant-funded programs that are also used. Really, they target children under the age of 8 and provide critical services to them. They also, by the way, pay rent. And then we also have school storage over here, town storage, and then as you can see, the ACE program. So community space, right now in town, we have this room, and then we have two conference rooms over in the Ritter building. So the intent would be to increase that space. So what you're looking at in yellow is a variety of conference rooms that would function during the day for town offices, then also perhaps in the evening for community uses, and then these larger rooms are meeting rooms as well. So the design considerations were to have separate secure entrances between the school, town office, and community spaces, to again have that additional parking, which can be utilized by the town for other school, sporting, community type events. Also green space in the back for town employees, community, and school-based programs, and the ability to expand to the second floor in the future if needed. And keeping as much open area in front to be used for concerts, community events, and other activities. Why we did not put parking in this new plan in that center island. Look at the building use breakdown. This slide depicts how the buildings would be used, the new building as well as a renovated building. So, one of the considerations in the renovation is that we wanted to keep cost as low as possible. So that then was to not move as many walls as possible, keep as many existing walls in place. So when you're using that becomes more of a limitation for you. So without that, space just works a little differently. Overall, even though this depicts program space and square footage for program space, overall the new build would be about 5,000 square feet bigger, and there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is that there's 3 stairwells. The current building doesn't have any. We also have that larger mechanical room that we talked about. We have an elevator in this building as well. So adding in kind of areas is how we kind of.
Can I ask a question on this one? So the current footprint is 55,000 square feet.
It's about that, correct.
So you're saying the new one would be about 6,000?
It's really, the current footprint, we say 55, I believe it's closer to 54, and the new one's 58. So it's really about 4,000-ish square feet.
Okay, so I would, And then when you do your per.
If I may ask, it may be easier for me if I can get through the presentations and hold the questions to the end. Would that be okay?
Sure.
So as we look at the building, the next slide just is the bottom line here of the cost to renovate and then also the cost to build new. So as we look again at these costs, for the renovation, again, we were at that 22.5 number, and now we are at the 28.9 for reasons explained. And then also to build new, we have a rough estimated cost for the new at 30 million. There's additional costs, soft costs, escalation that's factored in, and that's how we are at a.
Can you hold on that slide for
Sure.
a second, Michael? Right.
Sure.
So these are the numbers that we have today. The top lines are the build costs. The bottom lines are all in with soft costs, contingencies, all that.
Correct.
In terms.
Correct.
All that stuff being a very technical term.
Yes.
Okay. What was out of curiosity, again, trying to get my head around where we've come in the last 48 hours, what was the original cost to renovate that we were working from when we got ourselves to $23.5 million?
18.5 million.
18 and a half?
Yes.
Okay.
So what happened in just 18 months, again, we had a rental cost in February of 22 and rental cost in October of this year of 28. So I'm going to go ahead and go into, again, the next presentation. I would kindly just ask if you would, I'm sure you're jotting down, I see you guys taking many notes, so I'm sure there's going to be several questions coming here. All right, so this article, the information that's in this presentation really applies to both, and that is why we're doing these together. The first kind of 2/3 applies to both. So this just represents what the article is, $350,000 for design development, for money for design development of advancing the schematic design of a new build to a build that can then go out to a more specific, to have a design that is more detailed, to have all those building systems identified, and again, to get to a point where the town could be at a decision point. So on this article, what is the intent of this article? What will a yes vote do? A yes vote will identify that the town wants to move forward with this town hall community center located at the current TC Passios building, and it will also commit funds from free cash to complete the building design process in anticipation of a vote at the 2022 annual town meeting. So this slide goes over some terminology, and I'm sure you've already heard me say some of this, but this just to clarify a few things. So when we talk about program space, we're talking about what the space is used for, definition there to follow, and when we talk about adjacencies, it's really about what's next to what. Again, the definition there to follow. So a schematic design phase is when we are conducting those program assessments, surveys, and field tests while engaging stakeholders in order to identify the feasibility of a project, prepare a diagram or depiction, and its rough estimated cost. Now, the design development phase is when we're doing that schematic design by conducting analysis of major building components, including those foundations, structural systems, plumbing, and the HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, in order to prepare detailed floor plans, architectural renderings, and its estimated cost. Now, in Massachusetts, we have a 5-step process in which we do public projects. So this slide demonstrates that what these 5 phases are. That we have the schematic design phase, design development phase. These can be combined into one phase. However, there's distinctive elements that separate the two. And then construction documents, bidding, value engineering. Value engineering is when you have those bids and then you kind of walk through and say, well, maybe we can use a less expensive boiler system. Maybe we can change some flooring material here and help reduce some costs. So that's what the VE process is. And then the last thing is construction administration. Now, this slide also speaks to design development costs or design costs. So when you have a project total, $30 million, $40 million, typically your designers and engineers together, they're going to charge about 5 to 10%. Industry norms are about 8. So when you have that total number, again, 5 to 8%, 5 to 10% of that is your cost for your architects and also your engineers. Now, what this pie graph depicts is how they then bill that out. So if they're getting that money, this is how they're going to bill it out. They're going to bill out 20% of that total cost when you're going through the schematic design phase. Again, at the end of that, you have a rough estimate, and it's really about project feasibility. Then they're going to bill you that next 20%, again, is coming out of that total project cost. That next 20% is going to be during the design development phase, and we already discussed what that does. And then you get to a decision point. So typically with all projects, there's an investment of this money, about 40%, to get to that decision point to decide, hey, is this something we really want to do? Now, this next slide depicts how town buildings are currently used. And a quick orientation to this slide, and I've also handed this out to you guys. I imagine that there's going to be more discussion on this later today. The green indicates a town type use. Again, the yellow depicts a community type use, and the bluish color depicts a school or an educational type use. Now, when you look at the TC Passio's slide, or that row, you also see a couple of items in blue, where the text is in blue. Now, what this indicates are the areas that are the groups that pay rent. The town does not appropriate funds, as you're aware, for the TC Passios, and so how we keep the heat going and the lights on is by collecting rent for that building. Now, on the left side, as we have these names, it's also about capacity. We're at 100% capacity here at Town Hall. We're at 100% capacity over at the Ritter building, and we're at 97% capacity of usable space at the Ritter building. Also at the Ritter building, at the TC Passios building. Now, we also have a note here that approximately 15%, it's a little more than that, but approximately 15% of the TC Passios is not usable. And in the following slides, I will explain that in more detail. So this slide depicts, I'm showing a couple of slides. These next few slides are just over current conditions, and it shows the current conditions of Town Hall. And are we projecting here? Yep. So the slide on the left, several years back, we had a sewer project here, a sewer line renovation project here to upgrade that line. However, there have been multiple backups, multiple issues with it. And as you can see on this left slide, multiple repairs. So when the sewer line backs up, it backs up into the basement of this building. And so what the photo on the right depicts is you see the plastic floor underneath here, and so it depicts the plastic that's over that earthen floor. As, again, when the sewer backs up, it makes it a little easier to clean it. Probably not very comfortable for anyone working here, but it makes it a little easier to clean. What we're also looking at in this photo was kind of taken from this view in the basement looking this way. So this space, as from the exterior of the building and this is the elevator that we're looking straight at, and then these columns start somewhere around here. You can actually feel it, it's a high point, and everything beyond that is low. So this next slide speaks to how this building is supported. So we have columns here in the building. We also have some telephone poles, as we see in these photos, pretty notable cracks in several of these columns that are supporting this building. As you see in that photo right there, one of the columns is no longer actually touching anything in the foundation. It's kind of just leaning against some conduit. We can see the wire that's all over the place down here. This building was not clearly designed for this purpose. And just to give you some background, I think if you don't know this, so this building was initially built in, I believe, the 1820s, 1830s. It was moved to this location in the 1860s. It was raised up. The first floor was added to the building. Now, we also, and my commentary here as well, is that in 2016, we had a TAP-A study of town buildings, and one of the things that was identified during the TAP-A study was that there would be a that there would be a need for building stabilization in the future. And if I can go back, well, we're not going to go back. We also know that this building is kind of leaning a little bit. So what this next slide shows, you see some wood rot over here that just popped up on you, and you're about to see a big hornet's nest pop up on the bottom right-hand side. So what this is looking at is up in the attic looking this way. And so what you're seeing are holes in the exterior of the building. This is not an airtight building. You also are seeing that we have some wood rot in different areas. Some of this has been corrected with steel supports. This wood rot is over the front of the building. But you can see in that photo the condition of some major beams here and the significant splitting that's occurring. And the bottom right, the reason why I include this wasp nest is no longer active, but it is pretty big. It's about 2 feet by 2 feet. And so staff report that we have birds in the building, that we have squirrels in the building. When I was here, we did notice some squirrels. We did see some squirrels and birds. But that staff report that there's squirrels in the building, which there are, that there's birds, that there's wasps, et cetera, and just highlights the pest issues that come with that. Now we talk about town storage at the Ritter building. So this is access from an office, and so we can see, similar to what many of us have in our own homes and our attics, and then we see some storage. Now Ritter was designed, and I want to I'll talk about storage for a second here. Storage space is a little different than typical walkable space. So when you design a typical building, everything is about, what is your pounds per square foot. And typically common areas, you're designing for about 100 pounds a square foot. When you're planning for libraries, things that are carrying paper, which is like wood and it's pretty heavy, you're usually calculating for about 150 is your minimum target per square foot, and 300 is your goal. So typically, any building that's storing something, it needs to be far more supported than a building that just has people in it. So what this slide demonstrates is the difficulty in accessing the storage in town in Ritter building. Also, the records that are kept in the attic are records that are routinely accessed. These are planning records typically to these into the attic several times a week. I think it's not a secret that this doesn't come close to complying with any building code of how you walk up and down stairs in storage. Now, when we talk about town storage at TC Passios, the photo on the left just depicts kind of what these classrooms look like. There are many classrooms that have storage. On the right-hand side, this is just another depiction of that storage. Now, as you look at this photo, you'll see in the upper kind of middle portion of that room that there's some staining on the ceiling. The staining is because a roof is leaking over there. And so as we plan storage, we're kind of moving it around the areas where the roof is not leaking. This slide just demonstrates continued issues with the roof, and then this bottom picture that's about to pop up here is a nice crackled floor. So let's talk about that. All of TC Passios has asbestos tile. Is tile with this. Asbestos poses risk to people when it's disturbed. As we know, it causes chronic disease and can kill you. And so these rooms, what happens when you have is that when it falls onto this asbestos tile, the tile becomes bubbly, the room becomes a public health hazard, unusable space in TC Passios, it is because it's a health hazard. We also have a former library in the TC Passios that is fully molded out. This next slide just depicts on the left-hand side, again, more demonstrations of just kind of the extent of the roof problem that we're having. And on the right-hand side, this is the teacher's lounge. So when the superintendent of schools wants to take a lunch break, this is the area that the school offices have to use. As you look at the ceiling tiles, you'll see multiple stains on the ceiling from the leaking roof. You'll notice the air handler sitting right on top of right above the tables that they would be eating at, and just the general dingy condition of this room. Certainly not, in my view, acceptable. So what are the problems that we're trying to solve? And these next few slides are going to talk about that. So I'm going to assume that you guys are going to read this, so I'm just going to hit a couple topics here. So for town departments, the main problem is that we do believe that a town hall, the historic vision of a town hall is a consolidated area with all town offices. And so we believe it's important for town offices to be co-located for cultural issues as well as for efficiency issues. Right now, we have staff that walk across the street every day just to perform their duties, which is inefficient. Also, as we talk about parking, confusion by those who live and seek to conduct business here. You know, when I was in the Ritter building for about 45 minutes to take some photos, there were probably about 3 people who came in looking for directions, right? And I was there for 45 minutes, and staff say this happens all day. So when you really think about that on a larger scale, how much time are we wasting giving directions to people? And of course, neither of these buildings are ADA accessible from the front door, which ADA compliance is a civil right. That is not a must, or that is not a want or nice to have. That is a must have. And so if you can imagine a handicap patron who then has to walk or wheel around to the back side of this building to find out that they're in the wrong spot, I mean, this stuff just becomes, it just gets ridiculous. All right. So we also have the storage conditions and capacity. So while we do have many digital records, some records are kept, physical copies are kept for certain periods of time, others are kept forever. And so we do have to physically keep copies of those records. When we talk about the problems that we're solving for the school departments, you know, they do have a good working relationship with the rest of town offices, but there is a decreased amount of synergy with those municipal departments. We also, as many people are aware, we have capped capacity right now for extended day programs, and this really becomes a problem for parents. And then the inadequate electric supply, and this is really just, these buildings were not, this building in particular was not designed, well, none of these were designed for modern technology. But in the Ritter, with your concrete walls, so what happens here is that because modern offices use computers with monitors, multiple outlets are needed that are not available. And so oftentimes if staff want to use an air conditioner, there's kind of like this awareness of what else is on this line, so that way you can unplug things, so that way you can do that. Or if you need to use a copy machine, you can't do both. There's also an antiquated telephone system in the building, and because of the cabling issues, it just makes it more difficult to do business. And again, the school has their records stored in the TC Passios, which they're also kind of playing magical chairs with where that storage can go to avoid the roof from leaking. The last point here is about easy access to the low roof. So, you know, kids are kids. We do know that kids get on this roof. And you know, that poses more damage, presents more damage to the building, and presents itself as a potential safety hazard as well for those kids. When we talk about the community and the problems that we're solving for the community, it's the lack of meeting space that can accommodate public participation, the lack of meeting space for public education, seminars, support groups. Again, we have this room and 2 conference rooms in Ritter. Inability to broadcast all board and committee meetings, inability to offer disabled residents access to our primary public buildings through the front door. We have an aging building at TC Passios that requires millions of dollars to continue using, and lack of affordable access to a local commercial kitchen, which has been a constant request from our residents. So the solution here of both the renovation and a new building, it fully resolves all of these problems, and it addresses additional needs. It will provide additional parking, as we discussed, for school events, space for those community meals, municipal space to account for future growth, and it continues to provide that centralized voting location, those child support services, and a gym for use by the Boys and Girls Club and the Senior Center. Now, how does this fit into a bigger picture? So what this does is it allows us, this plan, either plan, allows us to maintain this kind of idyllic hamlet of a town village center, and also resolves those priority community and municipal space needs, consolidates resources, and will improve collaboration. It best supports our community programs. It's a future-proof design that anticipates that we will grow, and it's a multi-generational building that invests in our community's values. And it creates an opportunity for us to better preserve this building, better preserve the Ritter building, our historic structures, and provide space through that preservation, providing space for cultural and additional community needs. So the funding here for Article 8 is certified free cash, and the beginning is the definition of what that is. I know you guys know what free cash is. So the bottom line here is that free cash is unspent taxes that have already been collected. Now, as per DLS, Division of Local Services within the Mass Department of Revenue, free cash should be used for paying one-time expenditures, which this is, funding capital projects, which this contributes towards, or replenishing other reserves. Now, as we look at our history of free cash on the right-hand side here, we note that, yeah, we've had some difficulties in the past. We definitely can see the impact of our new town manager, Heather, and when she came on board with us, certainly our free cash bumped up. And also, we have a significant amount of free cash going into this right now. And the reason for that is conservative budgeting practices that occurred during the pandemic, as well as several costs that were offset by the federal government. So cost escalation. So assuming that we are before the town in in May, with a new building or a renovation building that's costing $28.97 million. What this slide demonstrates is what this cost will do if we do not move forward. That every 6 months, we're going to be looking, if we think of votes happening at special and annual town meetings, we see the impact of a decision that's delayed by a year. It's $1 million more, same building. 2 years, almost $2.5 million more, same building. And again, 3 years, almost $4 million more, same building. Now, when we look in today's dollars, and I have this here, and I did not put in a 30% escalator here. What I used was a construction cost index to identify this amount. When we look at the cost of the middle high school, which was built in 2016, that building today would cost us, and this was our portion of that building was $34 million. That building today would be $4.5 million more. Overall, $9 million more. Again, our 50%. And the public safety building that we built almost 20 years ago, that building as well would be almost double in price. So how have we investigated solutions here to resolve this? In 2013 and 2017, we had a building reuse committee. This committee investigated best uses for all town buildings and property located in town center. They proposed several articles to the town about how to move forward. And I want to pause here to talk about building reuse because I think it's important to the discussion. One of the things that building reuse was trying to do was say, what is the best use, right? What is the best use of our town center? We just created this village, or we're creating a village district that says that we want to promote kind of economic activity. How do we best do that? Most of those ideas were not approved by the voters at town meeting. And so what we have then is and many people have said, what about senior housing, over at the current primary school? And part of the reason why the Building Reuse Committee proposed some of the articles that they did, which essentially would have given the select board the ability to negotiate directly rather than going to town meeting, is let's talk about how much money we've spent already trying to come up with a plan. So to ask a developer to spend that kind of money without being able to negotiate with people in good faith and to leave it up to town meeting, no one's spending the money. So you don't get private interests at all if you're asking them to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars and you don't even have the ability to sell them what they want to buy. And so with the Building Reuse Committee, and again, I'm paraphrasing quite heavily here, but the result of that experience was we spent 4 years looking at all these potential things that we could do with all these buildings, and ultimately the voters said we want to retain ownership of this property, of all these properties. The TAPE study in 2016 was an assessment of primary town facilities. The Vertex report in 2018 was a detailed assessment of the TC Passios as well as other town facilities. And then also in 2019 to the present, we've had the TCP Design Committee. The key points of the TAPE and Vertex study. So the Vertex study was a visual inspection of town buildings. It was not a detailed investigation of what we can do. It was, there were no walls cut open. There were no structural things that were looked at. It was a visual inspection to kind of give you an idea of what you were looking at. And their recommendation was that some buildings needed a more in-depth investigation. The TAPE study was kind of looking, what happened before that was looking at, hey, what is kind of, if you wanted to consolidate offices, what is your best option to do that? And both studies led towards the TCP being the best building to be able to consolidate, given that this building, the land, is literally what the building just about. We don't have much parking here. We have, 3 spaces out in front. And then also at the Ritter building, just the inability to really expand that building for the same reason, lack of parking and other issues. So the TCP Design Committee has spent the last 2 years looking for how we can consolidate these town offices, school use, and community uses, and we can see the dollar amounts for that. And then in 2019, so 2019 in May was when the TCP Design Committee was created following spring town meeting. And then that fall, at special town meeting, we did a survey. The select board had a survey at special town meeting asking residents to identify potential uses for 30 School Street, the old primary school. And so so there were 6 options that were presented. One option was a town hall. One option was a town green. One option was kind of with a parking lot. One was a parking lot with a green space. One was to renovate the building to become a new town hall, to tear it down to build a new town hall, to do senior housing, or to do a small business building. Now, for the purpose of these slides, the town green and lot with green space are 2 variations of the same concept, and a renovated town hall or new town hall are also 2 variations of the same concept. So when we asked residents what their first preference was, 45% wanted some version of a town green or a lot with green space, 25% were interested in a town hall. We asked what their second preference was. The 53% want some kind of interest in a town green or a lot with green space, and then we see that the interest in the town hall slightly decreased, as well as the interest in the senior housing. Now, the interesting thing here is that we also, again, it's 6 preferences. So when we asked what the 6th preference was, what's the thing you like the least? 14% said a town green, 55% said a town hall. And so this has helped guide how the select board has approached these different properties and come up with a plan for what we can do. The critical thing here being that the purpose of the survey was saying, hey, let's go to the people who make the decision, the people at the town meeting, ask them what they want. So that way, we don't keep spinning our time and wheels, and we give the people, what they want. So how this factors into a framework, a facility framework, the path ahead. So, if we move down this road in spring 2022, there will be an article at the annual town meeting to move forward with the town hall and community center with the expectation that that will be complete in 2024, 2025. And again, this is for a new build. Spring 2022, old primary school, this location, to move forward with that town green and additional parking. And estimated that would be complete about 2023. And then also next spring, if we move forward with this town hall and community center, then we need to get a committee formed right away to be able to establish this historic town hall and Ritter building committee, so that way we can really start digging into how we can best preserve these 2 buildings and enhance the cultural and economic interests of our community, with the expectation that those uses would go into effect following these buildings being vacated. And again, this is the article that's before the town. Now, my only final note in closing is that because of these dollar amounts, we have an article before the town for $23.5 million for funding for a renovation. The select board has not made any kind of decision yet on this, but our conversation on Tuesday night, was that our inclinations are that we would ask the town to pass over this article. And likewise, and the reason being that having a cost that's significantly higher, I think the general sentiment is that it would not be appropriate to increase that dollar amount on the floor. The other article is the design development funding. Again, I think the expectation was that we would get a dollar amount that would be lower than that $334 a square foot, not in the $700, $600 price range per square foot. And the select board also believes that these 2 articles go together. And so I also expect the select board to request to pass over both of these articles at town meeting. And with that, I will stop for your questions.
So, thank you, Mr. Jeffries. I appreciate your presentation. It was extremely thorough, as I expected, and thank you for taking the time to go through some of the details that I think you'd kind of rushed through on Tuesday, and I understand why. I have a number of questions, and I think that there is some additional information that I would like to share before we get into questions. But before I do that, I'd like to invite the town manager really briefly to talk about what we can expect in terms of a financial analysis on the new numbers that we received on Tuesday night. And I know the answer to this question. I got it via email, but I want everybody to hear it before I continue.
So yes, I was in contact with the chair. He asked this question. I have asked our financial advisor to do include both the new renovation figure and the new construction estimate as well into a scenario.
And what is your
He's on
expectation?
vacation
I know, yeah.
This week, expected back in the office on Monday, but he's very prompt with responding, so I expect I'll hear Monday, early Monday, on when he can get that information to us.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. So, as some of you may have seen on Tuesday night, I spoke and asked for the third time the select board to pass over these articles at town meeting, because it's my belief that we are now in a situation where not only do we have some virtually impossible decisions to make with respect to the dollars, we have a very short amount of time to be able to analyze the impact or think through some various scenarios that might still get us to where we want to be. We've just run out of time. However, that night, I have the same manila folder that I had on Tuesday night. I did run my own analysis, and I would preface this with, I have a political science degree from the University of Southern Maine, so, it's not a certified financial piece of advice, but I do okay in projecting marketing costs. So, the cost projection that we received, or the tax implication projection that we received from the financial consultants on the average home cost was $277. That's what we published in the warrant. If you directly extrapolate that number to 28.9 million, that number goes to $341 per average household per year. And if you directly extrapolate that number to the 39.6 million, that number goes to $467. Today, after receiving that email from the town manager, I went and hacked some Excel file that we had received from the financial consultants a few weeks ago, using the $23.5 million cost, looking at the excludable debt limit that we have for, our town policy for the limit of excludable debt as a percentage of total tax levy, service for excludable debt, excuse me. If you recall, in the town warrant, we used the financial consultant's number, and I believe we were at about 10.67%, give or take a percentage point, in 2025. If you extrapolate those numbers to the $28.9 million cost, I believe we are going to be at 11.56% in 2025. If you extrapolate the $39.6 million cost, we'll be at 13.29% in 2025, and that will decrease to 2029 to 11.36%. So it'll be in violation of our policy for a period of 5 years. And then if we were to go and do something with the Turkey Hill building, at this point, having no idea what the cost would be, it's likely that we would again exceed that, that limit from 2032 to 2036. And again, that's just playing with the numbers to try to figure out, based on the estimates that the financial consultants made, where we would be. And I think that, unfortunately, we don't have an expert to bless off on that, but I think I'm close, based on my numbers. So I want to open this up to the board, but I have really, I want to focus on one key area, Mr. Jeffries, which is the needs for new space, newly renovated space or newly built space. And the process by which we followed to get to this proposal to build a new building that runs between 55 and 60,000 square feet, either a renovation or a new building. And the history is obviously, we started going down a path of, we want to renovate a building that we have available that we think has good bones, and we began that process. And we put some money into the design plan and formed a committee. And the committee, as you described, originally went in with the plan of demolishing a portion of TC Pasio's and maintaining a portion for basically municipal use. Where do you think we would be if we had continued down that path?
I think we would, the answer is I think we would, so that, let me step backwards. That vision was provided in, I believe, the Vertex reports of what it could look like. Now, what that vision did not account for was the fact that this building is already heavily used. So when we talk about the renovation or the new build, you know, one thing I want to keep everyone, make sure you guys are aware, is that there is not one change in programming use. Everything that would be in that building is already happening. It's already happening at the TC Pasio's, it's already happening at Town Hall, it's already happening at Ritter. So the expansion, the new spaces are for the community. It's giving the community more room, the community more space for public meetings, again, for that kind of educational space. So I think that had we have, you know, when the article was created by the town, it specifically stated consolidation of town offices, school uses, and community uses. And so when you look at that square footage and you look at that plan, you're using the town offices and those community uses as the majority of the building. And so what ends up in the renovation plan, at least, is that your community spaces are centrally located. It's a currently existing gym, it's a currently existing cafeteria, and it's utilizing a couple classrooms in that general area for those community type purposes. So, you know, the only expansion here is on those community type uses. So I think that if we did not plan for all those different uses together, we would be needing to fund another building or a significant renovation to account for some of those uses to be somewhere else.
Okay. Any questions from the committee?
Question and comment. And I made the same comment at the Board of Selectmen's meeting Tuesday evening. Mr. Jeffries did briefly mention it in his presentation, but the deficiencies and inadequacies that were outlined in the report that he just gave as to the condition of the TC Pasio's building are dealt with in the renovation numbers and in that project. So you're not going to end up with a building that has those deficiencies after you renovate it. And obviously, with a new build, those don't exist because you've got a brand-new building. Just want to make it clear to the public that either one of these projects, as designed, painstakingly was reviewed by the TC Pasio's committee and made sure that we end up with a quality product at the end of either project. Unfortunately, the numbers came in just about double from where our brains were when we started this process almost 2 years ago. If you indulge me for just a second, I ran some quick numbers, and if I calculated wrong, please let me know. With the updated numbers, first of all, for the renovation number of $28,967,000 and change, my calculation comes out to $536 per square foot based on 54,000 square feet. The $39,637 and change for the tear down rebuild with a total square footage of 58,000 square feet, comes out to approximately $683 per square foot. One other note, happened to be looking at breakfast this morning, I pick up whatever papers are available, and back a few pages in the Worcester Telegram today was an article showing the groundbreaking for a school project in the city of Worcester. They're building a 426,000 square foot building. They just broke ground for it. The price tag is $293 million. That cost per square foot is $687. So one of the things I took from that is that the numbers we were given by our architects and engineers are on point, because we have a building that just broke ground that is going to be that type of cost per square foot. And it's not going to get cheaper. Yes, this may be a bump in the market. We don't know how long. It may never back down. It probably will never back down as much as it went up. But we can be guaranteed that the escalators of 4, 5, or 6% are still going to be there every single year. So the numbers that were shown on one of those slides of how much it costs us as we delay from 6 months to a year to 2 years are still going to be there. So if we don't do anything now, we're going to be looking, and don't change the program, we're going to be looking at spending $30 or $40 million 2 years from now to build the same building.
I respectfully disagree with pretty much the last 3 minutes of what you just said, but I'm going to contain that to our discussion after the public hearing, because I don't think there's any evidence to support what you just offered.
May I respond to Mr. Passos? So, Mr. Passos, I had a conversation earlier today. Again, I work with Mass Development. I had a conversation earlier today with the engineering department to see what we're seeing for these kinds of projects. And this year, he also confirmed that most projects are coming in for commercial and office type uses above $650 a square foot. So that is extremely abnormal, but it does seem to be consistent with what we are seeing elsewhere as well.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, just, we have a few engineers in town, and some of them actually go to town meeting. Being an engineer and an architect, the numbers kind of float around in my head. So $334 a square foot, I believe it does not include the soft costs. That's just the building costs, right? So we're doing a lot of numbers kind of in here. There's 33,000 square feet, there's 54,000 versus 58,000. I think there should be something that kind of ties that out completely, because everyone's going to come in here thinking it's a 55,000 square foot building, but then you mentioned 33,000. So on that slide, I would kind of note somewhere on there. That's my recommendation. Like I said, I think 334, if I do my math right, that's based on a 22 million minus 5 million kind of ish number probably. So, just make sure the soft costs are not included in that when we're throwing these per square foot. So, and then by way of question, so, and I don't know how to frame this question. So if that building were to burn down tonight and the extended day was now left without a home, what would we do with that program?
I don't have an answer to that. The extended day program is managed and overseen by the school department. So, I don't know, but I would expect that the uses would probably temporarily be put in a school. So, if I may answer this a little broadly, we don't have sprinklers in this building either. We don't have sprinklers across the street at Ritter. The worst thing that can happen is someone throws a lit cigarette at this building, and we're going to be in a tragedy of trying to figure out what we're going to do. And then we're for sure going to have to spend some money to do something. Now, granted, there would be an insurance claim, et cetera. One of the questions at the TCP, during the process of identifying program space, there was a lot of pushback to the schools in particular. because the history is that this was a school. And the school said, we don't need the building, and so let's transfer this over to the town. And then now the schools mostly occupy the building. And so the question was, do you really need all this space? Like to the superintendent's office, could you locate somewhere else? Like, could you be in the Ritter building? You know, could you be in town hall? We were playing, you know, we were discussing the Boys and Girls Club being in the renovated building, and we were even looking at the current Boys and Girls Club. Could the school department be there? We also had questions about extended day, like why can't this just happen in a school classroom? Like, why does this need to be designated space? And the superintendent, and I'm going to paraphrase her best argument here, but it kind of came down to it's difficult for children to flip a switch. So if you have kids in a classroom which comes with rules and structure, and they're also in that classroom playing, that it's harder for children to see that kind of difference. And so by having extended day, which in some parts is kind of playtime in many ways, and having that kind of use in a schoolroom was not a best practice that the school engages in. And that was their rationale for that, was that it makes it difficult for the education portion of it for the kids.
Yeah, so, I mean, you kind of got to where I was thinking on that, is that, to me, busing kids from, you know, the primary school over to here adds operational costs on that, that we take on. Having them at the school, I don't see why you can't be at the school for extended day. I don't know how much space is actually dedicated to extended day, but it seemed to be, you know, maybe 3,000, 4,000 square feet.
Correct, about 4 or 5.
It's actually a dedicated space as well, which in my mind, I don't like dedicated space. Like, they're there for an hour or two in the morning, maybe an hour or two in the evening. So 4 hours a day, you know, including day and night, you know, you're kind of locking down this part of the building for, you know, 25% of the time. So, you know, I think a lot of buildings now are multi-use space. That's the way everything is going. So I would question the extended day being in there. And I think this just lends towards, I think there is still especially with the costs where they are today, a larger discussion as to whether some of this is nice to have or need to have kind of space. Pulling on that one a little bit more, the blue text on blue that you shared here, you said that you charge rent. Is the rent based on the operational cost, or is it based on the operational and borrowing costs? Meaning, would the proportion of the 5,000 square feet or 10% of the 28.9 million be rolled into the use that would be charged for rent? Or would that be kind of underwritten by the town?
Yeah, I don't have an exact answer for you on how that is calculated. My understanding is that there's a awareness of what the operational costs are, and that money needs to be gathered. And so the rent is based on cost, you know, and so that's my understanding there. The other part of that question was, we took the approach that since the superintendent is the superintendent, that it would not be appropriate for us to challenge her assessment of educational needs, given that none of us are doctors of education. And so we did not, you know, it was something that we wrestled with, but we decided that we would take the superintendent at her word, and that her recommendations about use, even though we pushed back and tried to get that space as small as we could, and I don't think every member of the committee even agreed with the rationale, I think that we all accepted that it was within her professional experience, and so we accepted it.
Yeah, I guess, you know, we all have wants, desires, you know, and then needs. And the question is it actually a need, or is it more in the desirement category?
Yeah, you know, that's a good question. My opinion is I think extended day is a must-have. I grew up, we didn't have a Boys and Girls Club. I think a Boys and Girls Club is a nice to have. I think it's great for children. It certainly is wonderful for parents, but children above the age of 12 can stay home by themselves. Children below the age of 12 cannot. And so the extended day being focused on that population that cannot be home unattended, without the ability to facilitate parents going to work, you know, it really makes it, to me, that is something that the community must provide. We must provide space so that way parents can get to work and their children can be in a safe location.
Yeah, I don't want to, I'm not intending to debate whether extended day itself is necessary. My question is the where it occurs as a necessity, was that on that?
I think you also have, like when you look at the Community Link and like Early Learning Center, they're both grant funded things. I believe Community Link is grant funded, and Community Link really just has to have a office, right? And so both of those rooms are shared rooms and shared uses. Part of the intent is future expansion, and so I think in the back of my mind, right, is that if there is a new school that is built, I would love for that new school to have an extended day program inside of it. I think that that's probably the best location for that. But between now and then, right now we have a cap on extended day. And so this would help resolve some of that cap. But also, the Boys and Girls Club was looking for additional room for their 100 and something students that participate in that program. And so if you have extended day move into another building, that space would still more than likely be utilized by children, and it would just go to a different group. And I think that logic was why I believe that logic may have contributed to why that use stayed in the building altogether.
Okay, and then just one comment. I read the library's strategic plan that was recently, did you read it?
I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, you're the representative.
I am.
They also have a vision of becoming a community hub,
Yep.
and I'm wondering if there's some potential additional synergies that can get this project maybe a little smaller based on that, so.
Yeah, I don't want to speak too far off topic here. I think the library's intent is to be more than just a place for children. I think a lot of people think, oh, you just go there to rent books. And the library actually does a lot more than that. You can rent movies. There's a whole bunch of programs that are out there that's free for the public. And they also have a space that they use for right now, like exhibits, for kind of special programs. And that was part of the intent when that building was built, was to be able to offer the community some kind of space. I think that they do a great job of maximizing that, but I would differentiate that from the uses that would be anticipated in a renovated or a new building, that less exhibit, more kind of daily use. Whereas, you can kind of have that dedicated room over at the library for a month or, 6 weeks for a program. Whereas I think the expectation would be that program in the community space of a newer renovated building, that would vary from day to day.
Yeah, I guess I was pointing at, I have used their community rooms, and they're a great asset. I don't know how utilized they are. Maybe they're just,
They're utilized.
yeah, I know they are. But, so, I agree with the need for some community space, but I do think it needs to be multi-use wherever, feasible, so.
I want to be mindful of the time. Do we have any more questions or comments from members of the board?
I have a couple.
Please.
Thanks. Mr. Jeffries, thanks for coming tonight. It's been a really good discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you as well. I've seen you in a couple of these, but I haven't physically met you. So.
Nice to meet you. You said at the beginning that, and I want to make sure I understand this because I'm, again, relatively new, trying to piece all this together. You said that, were you speaking on behalf of the TC Pasio's Design Committee, or just, I'm just trying to understand your presentation. Are you speaking on behalf of that committee? And then I think you said you were speaking on behalf of the board for the second, for 8. I want to understand that. I'm not sure I'm grasping what you're representing in your presentation.
Yeah, sure. So I am a member of the TCP Design Committee, and so the first portion of that presentation was me representing the TCP Design Committee and giving that presentation. The second presentation for Article 8, I'm also a selectman, and so that was on behalf of the select board. So I'm here representing two entities, one person, but two entities. I think it would be a little simpler at town meeting because that's when Mr. Roy will step up and take that first half.
So you were multi-use.
So is the design committee, are they fairly, I guess, I don't know, unanimous, or at least have a strong consensus on this article?
Yeah, so The committee, if I can say just the makeup real quick, 'cause I think you're kind of asking that question underneath all this as well. So the building committee is made up of one representative from the finance committee, which is Mr. Passios, one representative from the school committee, one representative from the planning board, one representative from the select board, and then the rest are citizens at large. And then, of course, I'm blanking on what you were actually asking me. So would you mind saying that
Is
once more?
there
Consensus?
with
Yeah.
the committee on what the committee thinks should happen?
As far as which approach, the renovation or the rebuild, the committee has reserved that decision until next week. So I expect the TCP Design Committee last night discussed, the intent was that the TCP Design Committee would not make a recommendation. That was the intent, that as a neutral advisory board, that they would not make a recommendation. However, I believe the select board would like for them to. And so that was discussed last night, and the expectation is that following this discussion tonight, that next week we'll meet again, and that there will be a recommendation by the TCP Design Committee.
Okay. And the design committee also, the uses for the building, is there consensus around that as well?
Yes, the programming uses, yes. We all agreed on the priorities, that we would prioritize use by town first, school second, and then community use third. I think that there was, within the members, there was some disagreement on the Boys and Girls Club and extended day. I think that those questions, certainly there was a lot of discussion on that. But in the end, there was consensus around the programming use.
Okay. And I guess just one observation then, and I think you're hearing it from a few of us, is, have we really, how sharp have the pencils been on kind of cut down the cost? And I feel a real obligation to taxpayers in the town, and I want to, make sure that if we're asking people to part with their money for several decades, that we've exhausted all the options, and we're really bringing value to the town.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm trying to assess here as part of this. So thank you.
Yeah, during the design development phase, when you get into that level of detail on material, that's when you can get a better cost. And so on the renovation project, I do believe that pencil was sharpened and that we have a good number to work off of. Now, on the new build, again, we're at the schematic design phase, so that cost estimate is rough. And so, until we go through a design development phase, we won't have a sharpened pencil, so to speak, on what that cost would be. I agree with you. Anyone who watches our meetings knows that I'm probably more conservative than I am not, and that I am not a friend of taxes going up, and that I think we need to be frugal with how we spend money. In this case, I think that we are kind of having a perfect storm. I think that we have multiple. We're in this paralysis by analysis, that we have buildings that are continuously falling apart. At one point, the old primary was a viable building probably to renovate, and our inaction has made it a non-viable building. And I think that, when we had the report in 2016 that said TC Passios is part of the way to go, here we are 5 years later without any substantial capital improvements, and now we know it's not. I think that we need to have a solution that will resolve this problem for the rest of our lifetimes. We've been talking about buildings for 20, 30, 40 years. We've never built a town hall, ever. And I think we need to get beyond it. And there's no way to do it without spending money. And I think we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our fellow members of the community to do so as cost effectively as possible. But either of these proposals will resolve this problem for the rest of our lifetimes, and potentially for your children's lifetimes as well. And I do believe that.
Thank you.
Just a couple quick questions. Thank you again for the presentation. That was very well put together. Appreciate it. Just really quickly, with the extended day, you mentioned removing potentially the cap that's currently on the extended day program, but at the same time, still having space. Obviously, we have balloon years that are going on with the primary school and Turkey Hill right now. How are we, has that been taken into account that we could have potentially doubling, tripling of the need there? And is that space available in the rough design?
It is. You know, one of the advantages of the Community Link and Early Learning Center is that those numbers kind of fluctuate a bit more. And so by having a cluster of rooms in the same area, you know, you do have the ability to use kind of expand your program, basically.
Okay, okay. The other one was just about anticipated sort of ongoing operational cost of a new build versus a renovation. Is that the general kind of upkeep, is that relative being, I assume since you do this for your job, is that relatively consistent or comparable between the two?
No, it's
No.
not comparable at all.
Okay.
The disadvantage of a renovation is that you still have what is now a 68, I believe it's 68 years old building, 69, is that you still have a 68, 69-year-old building. You know, that's still going to need things, you know, in the future, but they just won't be probably as significant. But new builds are very efficient. You know, I mean, a new home, a new building is extremely efficient design. And so, you know, it's difficult to calculate exactly what that efficiency difference will be. But in my opinion, my professional and personal opinion, I don't think that there's ever a comparison between renovating a 70-year-old building and building something new in terms of energy efficiency. I think that we need to, and this is why, well, I think we need to be mindful of carbon footprints as we go forward, you know, and try to figure out a solution here that potentially we could find, you know, put solar panels on the roof maybe down the line, and that this may help resolve some of our energy needs in the building. Those needs are higher on a renovated building for sure.
Okay. I know it's impossible to get an exact number because obviously this specific building has never been renovated before, but I have to imagine that there's similar aged buildings that have been renovated that could have at least some sort of analysis done for. On top of that $29 million price tag, there's an additional, you know, multi-$100,000 or whatever it may be. I'm just curious, I guess, why that comparison wasn't, or at least why it wasn't looked into sort of to give an actual number to say, yes, we're going to renovate it, it's going to cost this much, but oh, by the way, you're going to have to tack on all of this extra money potentially. Obviously, nobody could know exactly how much, but.
So during the design development phase, and I think that some of your question is answered during a construction document phase.
Okay.
Once you're designing out that building, you're coming up with all those building mechanicals in detail. Then you get kind of a rough operating cost. But I think that's not something we can answer in this phase of the project.
Okay, you have to move to that second 20% first, or the
40%.
The 40% portion, got it, okay.
Yeah.
And then the last question was just kind of going off onto the sort of carbon footprint aspect of it. Is there a reason why we wouldn't consider putting solar panels on immediately? Just for, I mean, if we're going to be building potentially a new building or renovating, why not reduce the carbon footprint at the same time? I can't imagine it's that much more expensive, but I haven't put solar on a $55,000 bill or 55,000 square foot building.
I think that goes into the nice to haves versus need to haves, and I think that is a nice to have. Unfortunately, I think that should be a need to have, but I think it's a nice to have. And so we were not actively looking for ways to increase the cost, and I think that would actively increase the cost.
It would, okay, all right, thank you.
But once we resolve this building thing, I assure you, if I am still a selectman, I plan on doing a hard pivot to getting solar fields in our town. But that's for another day.
Mr. Ray, did you have something specific to the solar question, or? Okay, please, yeah.
Greg Roy, and I'm the chair of the TCP committee, and that's a great question. And I was also a member of the middle high school committee when we built that. And I think, my recollection was we had a lot of discussion during that process about whether to try and get solar panels as part of the construction documents. And I think that the answer was that it's just difficult to coordinate that on on a bid like this, particularly when you consider, so there's panels on that roof now. And they happened a year or two after we put the building in service. And I think one of the reasons why that is because you can negotiate some lease agreements and some certain, you can get some, you don't have to invest the capital in that, as long as you've done the work to make sure that the roof and the infrastructure can accommodate it. So I think you get more bang for your buck if you actually separate those projects. So, just a little bit of.
Thank you.
While Greg's here, can I ask you a question? Just a follow-up, because I want this on record. So, back to your questions on operation and maintenance costs, because this came up during the high school, middle high school discussion, and we were promised at the time that maintenance costs would go down. And then the year after opening the building, we got a request from the school for maintenance increases in their budgets. And it was, no, of course the maintenance costs will go up. It's a new building, we've got to take care of it. So I'd like to see somewhere in here a statement on operations and maintenance costs associated with current versus this project, whether it's redesign or, because I felt there was kind of a bait and switch on that one at the time.
Yeah, so just so I understand, on this project, you want just an analysis of what we expect the O&M cost to be compared to existing conditions today, or
Well, I
between the
guess,
two
right?
options?
So we have
Oh,
like
okay.
this versus what, both of those two options.
Okay.
Because that also factors into the budgetary aspects of all this. Now, if we were maintaining our buildings, which we don't always do, maybe the maintenance costs are low because we're just, letting them fall to the ground, but, so.
I
anyway,
appreciate
that
that.
analysis, I think, is part of the equation as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thanks.
Mr. Gray, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I know there's been discussion about the size of the new building, if we're going to build it. And, there's this discussion about extended day and a few other places. If we were not going to have some of these things, if the building was 20% smaller, would it be 20% less, or would it be less than 20% or more than 20%? Because it's still big dollars either way, but it, sometimes, I don't know how this would work. Would, if we were going to build a slightly smaller building, would it be a lot less, or just, if it's 20% less, it's going to be 20% less money to build?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer off the cuff, but let's go.
I accept that. I was asking, I said, this is a hard question, but just in general, would it be?
Yeah, it's not a proportionate relationship. So it's not like you have a building that's 20% smaller, your costs are 20% less. You have to look at what's driving those costs. And so what drives the costs on a new build is that more building is getting torn down, right? We have, I think the amount of abatement, hazardous material abatement, I think it increases on the full tear down. So there's a couple of specific costs that are going to be associated with a new build, and so when you're talking about the square footage of a building decreasing, I mean a 20% reduction when your major drivers are due to site development, things related to getting rid of the old building. I don't think that you would have a proportionate, maybe a 20% reduction in size would result in a 10%, but again, shooting from the hip.
But even if it was, it's still a big number, still a very large number either way. But even if it's not, because I think, we're talking about, we've had some discussions about, do you have this there or that? But not having it might not drop the cost very much, if that's really what the issue is.
Correct. I think that that's fair. I think that there are certain programming needs that I think, there's a real focus on the part of the town of having consolidated offices again. That is a staff desire. That is a town manager desire. And I think many members of the community probably would want to get rid of the confusion as well. And I think it stays true to our historic roots of having a town hall, not Town Hall A and Town Hall B and Town Hall C. So I think that when you start then you account for all the groups. The question is this the best location for these educational uses? And I think that's a hard question to get away from, because then, when we built a new library, part of that whole rationale was that building was not good for kids. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to then say, well, hey kids, let's go back in the Ritter building. You know what I mean? So I don't know if there's a good alternative for where that can be right now. And it's too important to ignore, I mean, I can't imagine going before voters and saying, hey, by the way, we're going to build this building, it's going to cost $26 million, and we're losing a place for extended day. Let's vote for it. I mean, I don't see that we get the consensus that we have to get due to our town meeting structure. I know we've taken a lot of time here. Mr. Beardmore, I do appreciate it tonight.
I want to thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Before we do need to actually do the public hearing portion of the public hearing, which is to invite any members of the public for either questions or comments.
I welcome any comments or questions.
Ms. Licio.
Hi, Rhonda Licio, 181 Reservoir Road. For me, the disconnect came with the task that one of the tasks the TCP Design Committee was given, and that was to solicit all these groups, which were, I considered, non-essential programs and uses, to apply for space on pretty much the taxpayer's dime. It's one thing to have them in a building that was going to be vacant and plug those uses in, whatever requests come forward. To me, it's a totally different thing to then pass that burden on to the taxpayer. And I have said this twice, I believe, to the TCP Building Design Committee, that I did not disagree. They did the task they were told to do. I disagreed with the task, because what we ended up with were things that never would have, some of the terms I used last time I was here, like not mandated to have self-funded programs, or just duplication of space, such as would be in the extended day program. I didn't pull those kind of terms and standards from nowhere. They're very similar to what would be in our capital planning process. Those terms are in there, and we apply those things to items that cost $20,000. And to not apply similar or the same exact standards to a multi-million-dollar project is why you're going to end up with such an expensive end product. And as far as the extended day program goes, the only community I tried researching it that I could find that actually approved funding for this duplicate space for this program was Lexington, Massachusetts. So, as I said, I'm not here to criticize the committee. They did as they were told. I just disagree with what they were told to do. I think it should be a more strict standard of what we will burden the taxpayers with. So I'm hoping you will all vote not to recommend these articles. Thank you.
Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you did your research on the extended day, did you also research where extended day typically occurs?
It was hard to find.
Okay.
Like, I tried contacting someone at the education department, and they actually said that they don't keep track of that because it's not a mandatory program.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comment or questions?
Any hands on that?
I have one more question for you, Mr. Jeffries.
Okay, and will I be able to give a final comment as well?
Yes. It's a sort of a final comment-ish question, maybe.
Okay.
Which is, you mentioned at the conclusion of your presentation that, you know, I'm paraphrasing your words, there's a strong possibility that the select board will recommend to pass over these articles. If that were to occur, where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's a great question.
TCP takes a vacation.
Fort Couch? No, I'm just kidding. You know, one thing's for sure is that the problems don't go away, right? So I'm pausing here because I think that there's a lot of variation in the answer to this question. So I think that, you know, one thing that we all have to say to ourselves is, have we done the best possible job that we could do, right? I think that the answer for the TCP Design Committee is a resounding yes. For the select board, I think that there's more. I think that there's more. So I think that we need, and I'm speaking as an individual member of the select board, not on behalf of the board, you know, we have to, you know, one of the town manager's goals this year is to revamp our facility, how we manage facilities in town. You know, having them underneath DPW and that kind of range, it's the needs of tomorrow versus the needs of today. DPW being the needs of today and facilities being the needs of tomorrow. And oftentimes today takes precedent over tomorrow. And so you end up with a structure that doesn't work very well. So I think that there's number one, there's a need to change how we do facilities in town. So that way we prevent ourselves from being in this position again. If you have someone on staff with a high skill set level who's not having to be engaged in the light bulb changing on a daily basis, then a lot of this research that we've been doing as volunteers gets done on a staff level. And also you get preventative with things. You know, you kind of give yourself a map and say, over the next 20 years, these are our facility needs. And so you can more properly address them. It's what we do on the professional side of management of buildings, and it's what needs to happen here on the town side. So that's part of, I think, the solution. Another thing is, I think we need to figure out, is there any other alternative? And I think that there are. That's worth exploring in the sense of, I don't believe that there are many other alternatives, but I think that there's a couple of questions that are lingering. I'd rather not say just yet, but there's a couple of questions that are lingering that we need to look into. But what I expect is that over the next 6 months before we get to the Springtown meeting, that we will have a committee that will reevaluate this programming, that will reevaluate this plan in the sense of really saying and really kind of giving that definitive musts. I think that you also will have a select board that's engaged in that as well, and that says these are things that we as a community must continue to do. Ultimately, my opinion is I expect that in the spring that there will be an article before the town to fund a renovation of TCP for $29 million. I mean, ultimately, that's probably where we're going to end up, because I think we've already spent a lot of time, money, and energy looking into these alternatives. I don't think it will hurt to take a little bit of time and just reevaluate them, but I think we're going to end up where we currently are.
Okay. I know you want to make a final comment, but we did have another member of the public join the Zoom, and I don't.
I will wait.
I want to give that member of the public an opportunity to ask a question if he or she, I know who it is, has one.
Is this my buddy, Mr. Rogers, by chance?
Oh, Mr. Rogers.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. Dave Rogers, 82 Highland Street. This is a very, very complex situation that we're dealing with. But some things come to my mind that need to be done almost immediately, and that is we have to, as a town, I think, raise our debt service percentage, because it's clear that 11% it's just not gonna do it. So that's point number one. Prices being what they are, who knows what we could be facing in time. It's a moving target, to be sure. But there's also other things that we have to factor in to this whole equation going forward right now, or pretty soon, I would say. And that is costs that we could be facing for anything that we do at Turkey Hill, the old town hall, the Ritter, the Brooks House, and the primary building. But at the end of the day, it's going to cost the taxpayers of Lunenburg more money than what we initially have anticipated. And who knows what that is going to be, but it could be, $200, $300, $400, $500 more a year. So that's got to be factored into the equation sometime. But the bottom line is that there is a demonstrated need to solve these problems, and what are we going to do? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you. So in closing, what I want to address is, why are we, what are we really trying to do here? And I want to speak to, many of us work, if you look at the average income in town, the average household's doing pretty decent for themselves compared to the rest of the Commonwealth and really the rest of the country. But there are certain groups of people that we need to do a better job assisting. Specifically, I'm speaking to seniors. Right now we have a senior population that receives as service, as we know, about 1/4 of a percentage point of our tax revenue goes towards senior-related services. We have members of our community who are poor, and we have next to no town services for those members of our community. And then we have dedicated staff who make our town one of the best towns to live in as far as how well this town is run, how we're doing, the responsiveness, especially now with DPW, the staff that come here and work every day tirelessly for decades on end. We have a responsibility to the most vulnerable people among us, and we have a responsibility as an employer to our people. And we have to do better. That these needs that we're trying to address, we need to address them, and we need to address them now. That we're running out of time. We are running out of time, and we are a tragedy away from being in a crisis. This is an avoidable, preventable situation. I know that, as someone who I said identifies as more conservative than not, it is not easy to say we got to spend $30 million, but I'm saying we got to spend about $30 million. And that's not going to be the end of it. That's not going to be the end of it. If we don't move forward, and 5 years from now, approximately 5 years from now, 100% of our debt will be from schools. Schools will be about 60% of our budget. This isn't a war against schools. What I'm saying is that we have to do more than just educate children. We need to posture ourselves for what the needs are going to be in our community, not just today, because we're not meeting the needs of now. We're not. But we have to posture ourselves to meet the needs of tomorrow. We have to move forward. So thank you again for having me here tonight. I appreciate your time. And I wish you guys, I trust that we will, that through your deliberation tonight, that I know, that this is a hard decision in front of us, but I trust that with all of our collective will, that we will find a solution and get this behind us. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, before we close the public hearing, if I may.
Please be
I'll be
brief.
very brief. We've only been here for 2 hours.
You're killing me.
Short meeting. Just want to make the comment, and this is for the public at home more than the people in this room, because we all already know this. But to the public, I'm speaking now, if the programs that are programmed into the TC Passios project or the rebuild in regards to extended day and the other children's programs there. If we want to continue those programs, we are going to have space for them. And if we have to build that space, the town is going to pay for that space build. MSBA will not fund spaces for those programs. Just want to make that clear. So we either pay now or we pay later, and it can be part of a school project, but we will pay the dollar amount for that square footage. Thank you.
Would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Public hearing is closed. Okay. Believe it or not, we need to go back to Article 3.
Why did that get signed?
Well, we need to make a decision if we are going to, and I think we can just do this by acclamation. We don't have to vote if we're going to continue to defer on Article 3, which I think is probably the right thing to do. Is that everyone in consensus on that?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have enough information.
All right, so we can move on from Article 3.
If I can just on Article 3.
Yep.
The one thing I think you hinted at earlier, and it would be good if, when we present this article, is where those that we had staffing issues, finding staff, hiring issues, I guess, if that we anticipate through this negotiation, that'd be close. I think that'd be a very good thing to highlight during the presentation on it, which I'm sure you were going to do if that were the case, but
So,
that was one of the bigger concerns, is just, being able to hire first responders.
so let me offer a suggestion, and this has been done in the past at town meetings with the select board and the school committee on certain occasions. I don't know if this has happened recently with the finance committee, but given the situation that we're at with Article 3, would it make sense for us to post and caucus for a half an hour prior to town meeting and basically rehear Article 3 again, rather than have to caucus live at town meeting?
My opinion is, it's probably just, those articles don't tend to get a lot of debate and probably will pass, so I don't know that the town's looking for us to make a huge recommendation and do analysis.
I think we have an obligation to make a recommendation.
Well, we can do that on the floor, I guess, that's my own opinion.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead first.
I was just going to say, I don't have a problem with convening briefly to hear that. I think that might be helpful for me.
Anyone else?
To do it ahead of time?
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree, and that will allow us also, any other unforeseen things that happen between now and that day,
Or in the next 20 minutes?
or in the next 20 minutes, exactly, to at least review them and have our ducks in a row when we sit down at the table at town meeting.
Okay. Madam Town Manager, do you see any reason to not do that?
No, we're just asking if we do it an hour prior to, right before, something.
Can anybody do 6 on Tuesday, the 16th? I'll bring pizza. Oh, no, we can't eat in the room.
I'm just kidding.
We'll have it out in the parking lot.
That's fair, okay. All right, I will post for whatever we need to do for 6 PM on the 16th. Okay. We need to take Articles 6 and 7 separately, in terms, 7 and 8, separately in terms of recommendations. The options that the Finance Committee have, just to review, for those at home, I know everyone here knows this, is basically 4. We can vote to recommend approval, we can vote to recommend disapproval, we can vote to continue to defer, or we can vote that there is no financial impact, which I don't think is likely in these scenarios.
We'd get away with that.
I did have a brief discussion with the town manager via email, and my question was basically, are we in a position where we could also recommend to pass over these articles. I don't think there's precedent to do that, but a vote to disapprove could certainly be interpreted as acquiescing to passing over. So before we get into the substance of these articles, I think we should have that discussion, because I think it's going to have some ramification in terms of how we,
Sorry, just a quick clarification. So passing over means we're just not going to.
we're not going to hear it.
The town meeting won't vote on it.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And how is that done? Is that voted by the town meeting? They go, yes, we're going to
Yes.
pass over? and
Yeah,
it's
so,
50%,
so the moving party would say we are recommending, or we are moving to pass over Article 7 or Article 8 or whatever. And the moderator would ask for any, just like you would if you were voting yes or no, but it's simply a vote to pass over.
Is that a simple majority?
It is a simple majority, yeah. And again, I'm okay with breaking precedent here and doing that, but I just want to get your sense before we move forward on the substance of the article, whether that would be,
I personally don't want this committee to make a decision on passing over. I'd prefer it doesn't ever make it. But if we are going to do it, I want to do it on town meeting floor, excuse me, when the motion is active. If the motion is active to pass
to
over.
recommend to pass over.
Right.
Okay.
Do it on town meeting floor when it's happening. What we do about recommending or not recommending, that's up to this committee and a majority of this committee.
So what's the advantage of passing over versus not approving?
Well, the effect is the same. The difference is that you're not actually coming to a vote on the substance of the issue, right? So, for example, you know, we've had many articles in the past that have come up over and over and over again. You know, they fail, they pass, and it does have some substantive effect on whether you're going to bring an article forward again if it loses by 2 or 3 votes or whatever, right? So substantively, the outcome is the same, but it does have an effect on how the calculus might work in terms of re-raising an article.
Well, it also would, we would not have an hour's worth of floor debate on the article. if we passed over.
Substantively, it makes for an earlier night. Yes, that is true. That is true. It may affect your Wednesday. It might affect your Wednesday. Yeah.
The other thing it does is it doesn't give these committees, you know, a handful of us, a handful of TCP and the Board of Selectmen, it doesn't give a clear picture of at least the people that care enough and show up at town meeting as to what they're thinking, because they never get a chance to debate it. I think you'll be interested in what comes out of TCP next week. We had quite a bit of discussion this past meeting, and the final decision was deferred because we were down a few members. But that was the gist of the conversation, that as everybody has agreed, we've done our due diligence, we've done what we were asked to do. The thing that's missing in all of the work that's been done over the past decade is a clear and concise answer from the public and the taxpaying citizen as to how they feel about this. We don't have a clear answer from any of them as to how they feel about this, and without debating the articles, you're still not going to have it coming out of special town meeting.
Well, I want to keep the items separate, but I think that the timeline that we're on could be an easy argument to undercut the decisiveness of that vote. We're 2 weeks before a town meeting. There isn't, you could easily argue that we will not have enough time to bring out a representative sample of what we would normally bring out, given the timeline that we're on as well. So I'm not entirely sure that, you know, a vote, and given where we're at economically with these price spikes and the lack of knowledge that we have in terms of where we're going from a commodities pricing and from an inflation standpoint and all that, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why somebody might vote against this, where a year ago, under the exact same circumstances, at the price point that we were at a year ago, they would have voted to approve it. So I just, we are where we are, but I'm not sure that making the motion and bringing this to town floor is ultimately going, if we think it's not going to pass, that it's going to get us any positive result.
So our role as a recommending body, this discussion we had tonight should have happened about 6 weeks ago.
Yes.
And we should have had then deliberate process, the ability to seek information, to make a recommendation that ended up in this warrant that was mailed out to everyone.
Yes.
And for those reasons, I think we're in a situation where we might have been able to have deliberations tonight and got to an answer based on what we thought the answer would have been, meaning this is about a $25 million tear down and rebuild. But where it's now a $39 million, it's, none of us even considered that would be possible. So I believe that we should take a stand tonight and recommend that we pass over these articles, and that would feed into, you know, the TC Passios committee's recommendation, and ultimately the select board's recommendation come next week. So I think it's a statement that we're making. It doesn't get into the warrant article, but my view, I'm pretty firm that we should just pass over. There's just way too much unknowns. We're violating policy through these. So I know it's unprecedented, but I think it's probably unprecedented to
We
come
are in
forward.
unprecedented times.
We're in an unprecedented situation to begin with. So-
I think that's a good argument. One other thought that I have relative to that is in the event the article is not passed over, we still have the opportunity to re-caucus and re-vote a recommendation. Like, we're not going to lose any of the work we've done to date. We're informed by what we've done tonight.
And I'm not joking about this, it'll sound maybe funny, but if the renovation article were to pass at special town meeting on November 16th, then it triggers a special election by February something or another, which also would give the Board of Selectmen an opportunity to fill their board. And if they so choose to fill their board before May with the vacant seat they have to call a special election to fill it. So kill two birds with one stone if by some chance the renovation passed.
Okay. I will consider a motion. I don't want to do it yet, but I will consider a motion to recommend passing over. I think it's good, and we'll decide where we're going to go here.
Out of curiosity, what happens if come annual town meeting, 12 days before, we're in the same exact position?
Coulda,
Just
shoulda, woulda.
hypothetical.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't know.
we were kind of there at annual town meeting to a certain extent.
Yeah.
We're kind of there, we're there again at special town meeting. I think the analysis paralysis.
Cut an
perfect.
infomercial and beg for new finance committee members,
Well,
I
just
think.
in all
Yeah,
seriousness, I mean,
yeah.
are we going to be literally debating this exact same?
Well, I think we're very much going to be debating the merits of the issues, much the same as we are tonight at annual town meeting. I think that it is what it is. I mean, we are not an executive committee. We are simply an advisory committee, and we have to consider the articles that are brought forth. It's all we can do. We can certainly state our opinions, as I certainly have, but as a committee, our task is to consider the articles as they come.
But are we going to be potentially then pushing for the town to pass over again for 2022?
Well, it depends on what happens in the next 6 months. I mean, we don't know. I can't tell the future, you know?
It's more of a concern
Yeah.
than
No,
anything else.
I share the concern. I absolutely share the concern.
Well,
Yeah.
just to say what you just said, that we, as a committee, our job is to make a decision, a recommendation on the articles as they're done. So I think probably we should do that now. And, you know, for me, my own self is that I couldn't approve this, so the opposite of approving is disapproving, and I would disapprove it just not because I don't think this is a good thing to do, but I don't think this is the right time or the place, or there's other questions that we can do. So to make a decision of, to pass it over is just, it's going to do the same thing, but I think our job is to say, do we like it or do we not? Do we recommend people to say yes or to say no?
So
And as presented.
So just pulling on that, we could take 3 votes. We could take a vote on Article, what is it, 7 and 8?
7 and 8.
7 and a vote on Article 8, and then a separate vote just to say, we as a body recommend that these articles get passed over. And it's just then something that goes to the other boards
Okay.
that will be meeting before.
I'm okay with that as well. I think that's an interesting idea. I'm going to let the process shake itself out. I think it's okay to kind of conduct a straw poll to see where we're at on this, but I think before we do that, I think that we should go through and just kind of discuss our opinions on the merits of the articles in front of us. And I'll start. I have been against these articles since they were presented, and I still am. And that is not to, I have the utmost respect for all the members of the building committee, and I have the utmost respect for all the members of the select board. I simply disagree with where we've landed on these articles. I think that we went down a path to reuse existing space and somehow came out the other end with a plan that is more than double what any of us ever imagined on the front end. And there hasn't been a point at which an executive committee in this town or town meeting has said, let's rethink this based on the new facts that we have on the ground. I do think we made the right decision in the spring to spend the $54 million to get the comparative view. I think we would be in a really hurting situation if we had gone forward in the spring only to run into spiking costs now. We would be in a really bad situation. So we know more than we did then, but we still don't know what the effects are of the pricing spike that we're in. I'm not an economist. Mr. Passios is not an economist, and we disagree on where this is going. And the reality is that I don't think anybody knows for sure, and I think another 6 months of indicators might be helpful, at least in determining if this is an anomaly or a trend. And right now, I don't think we know. I think that it would be fine to take the next 6 months, look at some of the creative alternatives that Mr. Jeffries alluded to have a really hard and maybe a difficult conversation about, does the ACE program need newly built or newly renovated space? Does PAC need newly built or newly renovated space? Does Extended Day and Community Link need newly built or newly renovated space? Do we need a newly built or renovated space for our food bank? I don't think that these are discussions that we have had with the benefit of understanding the costs of those spaces. And I think that it would be good to spend the next 6 months thinking about that. I think that we as a finance committee also have an obligation, but without the feasibility of doing it inside of the next 2 weeks, to explain to the town what the actual out-of-pocket costs are going to be relative to these options. The town, it hasn't been published anywhere. And that needs to happen. It also needs to be put into the perspective of our outbound needs as well. Not only Turkey Hill, which is a significant cost that we're going to have to come to grips with at the end of the decade, but also the costs associated with the buildings that we're going to be vacating and our other needs in town that we haven't addressed. Ms. Licio mentioned a couple of weeks ago, stormwater. Talk about a can that we've been kicking down the road for a long time. Also, we may be entering a hyperinflationary period. And we are living in a state that has a 2.5% tax cap. If we find ourselves in a situation 2 or 3 years down the road we need to ask for an override, and all of us who were sitting here last week heard a representative from the Mass Association of School Committees say, yeah, these formulas kind of build in that communities go and pass overrides. We haven't passed an override in Lunenburg in over 30 years, a general override. How are we going to go to our taxpayers and ask them for an override when we're hiking up their tax bills by $600 a year? I think there's an awful lot that we need to digest before we can make a decision of this magnitude. And therefore, my initial inkling is to vote for disapproval, but I would certainly entertain and vote for a recommendation to pass over as well. Any other, why don't we just kind of go down, and I want to give everybody an opportunity to kind of state your thoughts and
Are you talking
on
about,
this.
are you referencing both articles?
Yes. Yeah, I was speaking to both articles. But if you want to separate them, please do.
Would you mind expanding your rationale on Article 8?
On Article 8. My rationale on Article 8 with respect to use or cost?
Well, I guess it's both, right? So
Mhm.
that's, you're
Yeah, okay.
referencing both.
So the argument has been made that the primary need here is to solve for municipal space needs. And in fact, that was the priority that Mr. Jeffries outlined, right? It was first municipal use, second school use, and third community use. And I understand that. Now, honestly, I have not bought off on we all need to be under one roof in the center of town either. Like, I didn't get that memo. I understand the arguments for it, but I don't know that that's a $30 million problem to solve. Setting that aside, I think that if we were to prioritize and say, okay, we don't have $30 million, but we have 20, or we have 17, or we have 15, let's work from the top, figure out that number, and figure out what we can afford to accommodate, and then what can we do creatively with what we have left to accommodate the uses that we are not able to address. Potentially using this space, potentially using Ritter, potentially renting space. There are a variety of different, potentially to acquiring new property. And those options have not been considered by the Building Design Committee because that wasn't their job. Their job was to deal with TC Passios. The Select Board has, Mrs. Licio is absolutely right, the Select Board has not involved themselves in helping to get to a better solution and get to a better outcome. And so the path that we're on is where we're at. And I feel like Article 8 could potentially, if we were to resolve that we can't spend $40 million, but we can spend some amount less of that, let's go through that process and figure that out.
So I'm would vote against each one of these as well, and I'm gonna just boil it down. There's so much discussion, I want to take a lot of time. I'll boil it down to a very simple explanation, which is, my two teenage sons, two boys, would love me to buy them a brand-new Toyota Tacoma, right? That's not gonna happen.
I'd like you to buy me one, too.
And so where I start with is, well, what can we spend, right? And I think it's similar to the point you just made is, what do we think is a reasonable amount to spend, and then what can we get for that versus, what are all the good things that we could happen? And I don't disagree that anything that we've talked about is not a good thing, but the other side of that is asking people to part with their hard-earned money on a yearly basis for decades, and making sure and being a check to make sure that we have real value being created and things that we really need to do, and to try to protect people who have other things to do with their money. So that's where I am.
Yeah, so I would recommend, and I would personally vote no on Article 7, $29 million to renovate TC Passios. Does not seem like a good use of town funds in the resulting costs to the the average or above average or below average household. So that would be a definite no. I would vote no even if we were to recommend passing over. But, and on Article 8, I don't think we've exited the conceptual design phase yet. And what I think Article 8 is really asking to do is to enter into the next phase of this. So I do not think the requirements are set properly. I do not think we have a preliminary design. So I would vote no on entering that phase, and definitely no if it's a $40 million building. So I would vote no on both articles.
Mr. Waters?
I'm somewhat torn. As the articles are presented, I would probably also vote no on both. And primarily because I have a difficult time combining town offices and school portion. Now, I realize it's not the school itself, but it's still a school functionality in the same building. And this is coming with from someone that has 4 kids that use extended day multiple times a week. It seems like, we do our budget separately. We have the school department budget, and that is all built into that. And then we have, we built this wonderful public service building. We didn't decide to, oh, by the way, let's add on sewer district to that building because for whatever reason they were in the building, just a hypothetical again. So the idea of having it all together, it does not make sense to me to put the school portion in there. So for that reason, as these are written, that's why I would say no. I do agree that we do need to have something done, and I am very worried that come May, we're going to be right back here again. We're going to kick the can down the road. Inflation will have gone up again, and we're going to be looking at $50 million or, $25 million for half of what we're trying to do now on a renovation. I also worry substantially that we're sitting on ticking time bombs in 3 different buildings currently. It's our I worry about what the use of the Ritter building will become. I know Mr. Jeffries mentioned that we'll have to figure out what happens with the Ritter, what happens with this building. And while there are plans that are put forward for the old primary school and whatnot, I worry that we're going to be in the same position when those buildings come up, and we're going to be kicking those on down the road. And it's this perpetual cycle of, we have this idea, we go to the effort of getting, not bids, but at least architectural designs for it, polling the community, and then, what was the first one, 2013 we've been doing this for, so we're closing in on a decade, and we're still deciding whether or not we should renovate that specific building. It's just, I don't know, I worry that we are in this endless cycle, and so, it's a completely divergent area to get to, but
No, I think it's
for the reasons I had said before,
fair point.
I would be voting no for these as they're written.
Mr. Passios?
I think everybody knows my feelings on the issues. I agree with the concerns that the previous speaker just expressed, and if we don't act now, where are we going to be 6 months or a year from now? We're going to be in a building that's sat for another year without any improvements and anything to protect it from demise. We're going to have employees that are eventually going to be pushing back because of the conditions they're forced to work in. And the dollar amounts may back off a little bit, but the dollar amounts are never going to go away. The comments about rethinking this whole process, who's going to do that? Are you going to is this committee going to put together a committee of volunteers to tear this whole thing apart, which has been done already since 2013, and try to come up with something without funding for professional help to do it? We're talking in circles and we're mired in the mud. I want to move forward in what the townspeople tell us what they want to do by having them tell us how they feel about the 2 articles on the warrant. That's my position.
Mr. Gray?
Well, I would vote to disapprove both the articles. However, when you look at this, and the main reason is because we're in a once-in-a-century kind of thing. There is, I don't know what the next 6 months, I know you guys disagree. I think if I got three economists together, they would have three different opinions. Well, that's not abnormal anyway. But, so I think waiting is probably a good thing to see what's going to happen. Now, maybe it does go to 50 million, I don't know, but maybe it doesn't. If it does go to 50 million, then the question is who's going to be building properties anywhere? And if the answer is we have to. First of all, we have a town hall that's not really built for what it's being used for. It is, from the pictures that we saw today, it's falling apart. It has serious problems. TCP is the exact same way. It's falling apart. It needs help. And if we don't, and we've talked about, what programs we provide. This town provides certain programs, and each of those programs are a benefit to the citizens. Maybe not all the citizens. My kids don't go to the after-school program. They're too old. But if we don't have those kind of programs, what kind of town are we going to be? If we don't have, and if you want to think about dollars and cents, if you think, well, I put a new kitchen in my house and that's why it's worth more, well, that's one reason. The other one is the town that you live in and the kind of programs in the community that you live in and who decides to live here. So to me, we can't ignore that part of it too. Yes, I don't want to get anybody's taxes raised beyond what it needs. But I think ultimately we have to look at this as this is not a question of do or don't. It's like, we're going to have to do something. And the question is what do we do? And if we say, well, we're going to do the cheapest thing we can and get rid of a whole bunch of programs, there's a cost to that. So that's, for me, for the next 6 months to discuss. But I don't think it's something that we have the foresight to make that decision now. So I would say disapprove both and move on and hope the world goes back to semi-normal.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
When the TCP Design Committee was put together, were they charged, and Dave, this is sort of angled towards you, were they?
I might defer to the chair, but go ahead and ask.
Sure. We have a couple members. Were they charged initially with based on the survey that was done, were they then charged to say, we want these three different groups, the municipality, the school, and the community spaces all together in the same building, so that's your task, is to go and do that? Or was it sort of, did it kind of come to that after polling? Or after just sort of
Mr. Roy?
the meetings?
I know how I would answer that, but I prefer the chair do it.
Greg Roy, I'm the chair of the TCP. I'm no more qualified to answer this than Mr. Passio. But to paraphrase the article that that set the charge into motion, it was to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate a sum of $265,000 to develop a cost estimate for the reuse of the TC Passios building for town hall uses, community uses, and school uses. So that's a paraphrase of the article, but yes, the charge was very specific, and it gave us those three uses, and it was to reuse the building for town hall uses, community uses, and school uses.
Okay.
So that was the specific, and then that charge flowed to us through the select board, who then formed and appointed the committee.
So was that article formed as a result of the survey that had been done previously, or is that, why did that article get put forward that way?
Yeah, Michael's the one to answer that.
That'd be great.
If you indulge us, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. That was a result of the TAPE and Vertex reports.
Okay.
So the select board was looking to resolve these concerns based on all available information at that time. That building seemed to be the most viable option for resolving these issues. And so that was what occurred. The survey that happened 6 months later.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I would entertain a motion for a recommendation on Article 7.
Can I, I'm sorry.
Please.
One more. So if we recommend to pass over, are we still considering that?
It's all on the table right now. That was what I concluded based on the
If we
discussion.
said- Because I'm just trying to think through this. If we said we recommend pass over, but it doesn't get passed over, then what do we do? Do we then?
The
go back-
article would be heard,
Yep,
the discussion would be had, it would be presented, and then before the vote, I'm assuming this, we have to meet with the town, the committee chairs will meet with the town moderator on Monday, just to make sure that
Okay.
that we're aligned on this, but he would then ask the finance committee for a recommendation.
Okay.
We would caucus, re-vote on a approve, disapprove recommendation.
during the meeting.
Yep.
I'll make a motion. I'd recommend, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend disapproval of Article 7.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Again, this is just on the article as it's written then, correct? Which,
Well, so that's so Article 7 does not specify a dollar amount.
right,
It would be foolhardy to move on Article 7 with the $23.5 million that is outlined in the Finance Committee article. Now, there's an argument to be made that that would be a bait and switch for the town, for the town, where you've got something in a Finance Committee letter, but you've got something else that's actually moved in the article. But legally, it is my understanding that we could move for the $29.6 million in Article 7. So my assumption right now, and it's just me, but I think we could all agree that our assumption is that if this motion were to be made, it would be made for the 29.6 million. I'm going to make sure I get that number.
28.967.
I'm sorry. I'm mixing up my 28s and 39s. 28.967 million.
640.24 cents.
Any discussion before we vote?
Again, I'm sorry, I know I'm getting a little technical here, but Article 7, if we say disapprove, but we get to the meeting and it's passed over, I mean, we never even.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
right?
It's irrelevant.
Okay,
Yep.
all right, so.
I mean, other than
what I'm-
people will know it's a public meeting, but
Where
we're
I'm
not
coming
going to.
out is I think we should say either approve or disapprove, and so I don't know if we second the,
It's been seconded. Yeah.
okay, so I disapprove.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of a recommendation all in favor of recommending disapproval for Article 7, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I'm going to do a roll call vote on this. Mr. Gray,
Yes,
indicate your vote, yea or nay.
yay.
Mr. Passios,
No,
Mr. Waters.
no, because of what we just discussed
Okay.
before.
Mr. Menard,
Aye.
Mr. Baelish,
Yes, to disapprove.
and a yes for myself. Motion passes. For the record, it is 4-2.
and that's the way it would be reported to, at town meeting when it's asked. That's fine.
Okay.
I make a motion to recommend disapproval on Article 8.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and second to recommend disapproval for Article 8. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Please indicate yea or nay. Mr. Gray,
Yay.
Mr. Passios,
Yeah,
Mr. Waters.
Yay.
I'm sorry?
Yay.
Mr. Menard,
Yay.
Mr. Baelish,
Yay.
and a yea for myself. We are unanimous, I believe, on Article 8. Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that the Finance Board recommends that Articles 7 and 8 get passed over.
Is there a second? I will second it for purposes of discussion.
I don't think it's appropriate except on town meeting floor if it is brought to town meeting floor to pass over. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so again, I think our recommendation should be made in the context that TC Passio's Building Design Committee will meet prior to then, as well as the Select Board, and it's just an indication that, in general, this board thinks it should be passed over.
So this should be interpreted as an indicator for other boards.
That's, yeah.
And I will personally say that a vote of this committee will not affect how I vote in the other committees. And that's something that's, made very clear that we're not an elected board, but decisions made by one elected board should not and will not affect another board's decisions.
So I kind of disagree with that, and I think we're in a unique position because we are a legislative board, not an executive board. And I think the reasons we talked about in length here is just that we lack sufficient discussion on the new data that's been presented. I think it's not been publicly brought forward enough that it should make it to the legislative floor. So that's kind of why I'm recommending that, that position, so.
I agree, but I think we should vote. I don't think unless anybody else has a point to make on this, but it is what it is.
So this would be more of, because we heard today that there is a good chance that this will be recommended to be passed over. So would there be a point which someone would say, hey, Finance Committee, what do you think about passing over? There is no...
It's an unlikely scenario.
Okay.
Yeah.
If there was, I guess, then the question would be is, if somebody said, well, what does the finance said to disapprove, but what do they think? If somebody asked, I don't know. I mean, you'd probably need Tim to...
Yeah, so my take on this is that the votes that we've just cast can easily be interpreted as acquiescence to pass over an article, right? But we have not explicitly stated that, right? To explicitly state this is, in my opinion, to say we should not be spending 2 hours on Tuesday the 16th talking about these articles. They're not ready. They're a fait accompli. Let's punt. Is basically would be the majority opinion. I don't think it will be unanimous. The majority opinion of the Finance Committee, if we were to get to that point. Would it actually come up as a question from the moderator at town meeting? Unlikely, but this is a public meeting, and this is what we do as a matter of public record.
Yeah, and ultimately it will be the Select Board that, they're the ones that sponsor this, right? That makes the recommendation to pass over.
Well, as the sponsoring committee, I believe that the building committee, they would have some bearing on Article 7.
Yeah,
Article 8.
There's a slight disagreement about that, and I think that needs to be hashed out before town meeting.
Okay, the good news is that's not our problem.
I agree. I agree. The other thing to keep in mind is, just because the motion to pass over is made on town meeting floor, and Peter alluded to this before, it doesn't necessarily mean that the voters at town meeting agree with that, and they may vote by a 51% majority to say, yes, we do want to hear this article.
Yes. And if that's the case, then our recommendation that we just made will stand as well. But in any event, I don't want to belabor this, it's getting late.
I also feel that that type of a motion makes more sense had we been unanimous on both.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
Valid point.
So I'm gonna vote against this motion just because I just don't think it's necessary for us to do that. I feel like I've stated my opinion with the disapprovals.
Okay?
So, Mr. Chair, we have two choices at this point. Either the motion gets withdrawn or we vote. We have a second, so it's an active motion.
You standing by your motion, Chris?
Yep.
All right, let's vote. Mr. Gray?
No.
Mr. Passios?
No.
Mr. Waters?
No.
Mr. Menard?
Aye.
Mr. Baelish?
No.
and an aye for myself. It fails 4-2.
And we now have precedence for this vote.
We do have precedence. Okay. Woo! All right. Article 8. Madam Town Manager, do we have a proposal for a consent calendar?
Hello.
I was ready to go home.
The select board voted the other night on the consent calendar to include Article 5, Article 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 being non-controversial articles.
Okay. For the benefit of our new members, could you please explain what a consent calendar is?
So essentially, those articles would be voted on first. The moderator would announce these articles are included in consent calendar, and they'd almost vote, and the motions would be up on the screen, so everyone would be able to see what the articles are and what the motions are, and it would be voted as a block. So it moves those, passes those as a block, and we move on to the next article in line.
Okay. So Article 5 is the Sewer Capital Reserve Stabilization Fund. It's basically a transfer from retained earnings. Article 9 is the easement for the distribution project that's going up on Leominster Shirley Road. Article 10 is the easement on Flat Hill for the culvert. Article 11 is to amend the sewer service district to include Marshall Park. Article 12 is 970 New West Townsend Road from Select Board to Conservation Commission. What is that property?
That's already been voted at a prior
this was
town
the
meeting,
correction.
and there was an error with the
Right,
parcel.
okay. And Article 13 is the salary administration amendment. Let's get a conversation going, perhaps with, starting with a motion, or would anybody prefer to converse before the motion?
I'd make a motion to agree to the recommendation on the consent calendar.
I second it.
Any discussion?
Just very quickly, I'll just make the comment that any member at town meeting can also, as each one of the articles is read by the town moderator, they will be instructed that if they want to discuss it, they indicate by hold or raise their card or whatever it is. So individual voters can also pull articles off of the consent calendar.
I'd also like to add that on Article 11, again for the public, this is not adding sewer to Marshall Park, it's simply just opening it up.
Yep.
Which I could see being controversial had somebody misinterpreted it.
Yep,
to
and
say-
probably somebody will, but it's worth a shot.
It's
Yep.
not the case, not the intention.
Hopefully, they've watched the public hearing.
Yeah, unlikely,
Yeah,
but
for
yeah.
3 hours.
Puts them to sleep, man.
Any further discussion on the consent calendar? We have a motion to, I guess this is a approval. What-
We basically want to be on the same page with finance and
All
select
right, so this is a
board.
resolution to agree to the consent calendar. Fair? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those not in favor? Motion passes unanimously, 6-0.
And just point of clarification to add to the last discussion about if the motion on the floor is to pass over Articles 7 and 8, that's a debatable motion. So debate could take place on the merits of why not to pass over the article. And
That should be fun. Looking forward to that.
Debate.
Okay, we do not have minutes to review tonight. Are there any committee reports?
I'm going to pass for tonight.
You're killing me.
But you came to the board.
That's fair. Anybody else with committee reports? The school committee did meet last night. The main presentation was relating to special ed topics, particularly focusing on dyslexia, which was an interesting conversation. There was a substantive discussion about the test and stay program, which has been in place now for almost a month. They have had, I believe, just over 80, I want to say 81 tests over the period of about 20 school days. And the purpose of this is where there's close contact and somebody is mandated to either quarantine or get tested, it's an opportunity to literally get the test in that, speaking of which, back wing of TC Passios, and wait 15 minutes, get your results, and get cleared to go to school. So apparently that's going quite well. In fact, it's been commended by inspectors from the state who were there earlier this week. And then the other substantive financial discussion there was a discussion about the bus contract, which has not been put out to bid yet. They expect it'll go out in January still. But the business manager, Mr. Cassidy, has been polling other school districts to look at what other towns or school districts are doing with respect to fees for busing, either in total, outside of the mandated requirement. The mandated requirement is basically through K through 6, I believe. So it'd be outside of the mandated requirement. I think that the purpose is, and I did ask for clarification after the meeting, what they're really looking at is inside of that 1.5 mile perimeter that we have for non-busing, because we have a lot of, young children and not necessarily the safest road conditions for walking. Is there potentially a fee option where we could offer that as a service for a fee to those families? No determination on this. I think we're pretty early, but the surprise was to Mr. Cassidy that many more communities are doing this than he had anticipated. So more to see on that. Any other committee reports? Public comment. Is there any public comment? Public comment from the board, Mr. Passios.
Yeah, I decided to do this outside of committee report. Just want to inform the public, a reminder, and should be in the ledger when it comes out tomorrow. Next Wednesday, November 10th, the TC Passios Committee will be holding a public forum in this room. We're going to have a business meeting from 6:30 to 7, and then we will open the public forum. It will be on Zoom. It will be live broadcasts, and the intent is to review again the information that was provided this evening for the TC Passios project. And at that time, that committee will give, I won't call it a recommendation because we are not going to recommend one article over the other. We're more or less going to be talking about, possibly anyway, that we feel that the citizens need to tell us what they want at town meeting. But that's what's coming up next. There will be an article also in the Ledger the Friday before a special town meeting with a brief description of the articles and what they accomplish. And then we'll be into town meeting. Thank you.
I just want to state that the work that every member, we're all volunteers in Lunenburg on every committee. And, I think that the beauty of what we have here in Lunenburg is that there really aren't many hidden agendas, if any, in Lunenburg. I think we all kind of put our cards on the table and do our best for what we believe and what's right for the town. When we were going through a much more contentious discussion about 17 or 18 years ago around the public safety building and the library, Mr. Rogers said something that really kind of stuck with me, which was, he had his opinion, everybody had their own opinions, but ultimately the voters at town meeting and the voters at the ballot box will make what is ultimately the right decision for Lunenburg. And I believe that to be true today. Having been on different sides of all those issues, I think that ultimately, we've got a really fine local democracy working here, and ultimately, we'll make the right decision for our town. Okay, any discussion on items for future meetings?
I don't have something for this, but I didn't know where to ask. As the unofficial librarian for the Finance Committee, Mr. Jeffries, can we have those two presentations for we put all our documents in a folder to go back to?
You just email us the PowerPoints.
After the meeting next week, I can't, we're gonna still tweak it a little.
Okay, but the slides you presented tonight are public documents. So could you send those to us, and we'll just keep them in our own documents?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe.
Well, it can't be a maybe. They are actually
Yeah, they are.
public documents. If anyone asked for them, we would have to produce them. So, but
Okay. Any other items for future meetings? Okay, our next meeting is special town meeting on November 16th. Our final,
no, it's not. It's a meeting before this.
you're right. You're right. Everyone, as if you didn't have enough to do on Tuesday, the 16th, come on down to Lunenburg Middle High School at 6 PM for an extra Finance Committee meeting, followed by special town meeting. And our last business meeting of the year will be on December 9th. Items for discussion will be follow-up to the Chapter 70 discussion that we had. I don't have any solid confirmations from legislators. I will keep you all informed via email on that, or when I see you next at special town meeting. We may have or request a conversation with the Green Committee relative to the streetlights project, just for a status update and see where we're at and see what might be some ramifications on that downstream. And also, I'm going to put an item for an ARPA discussion, but that's going to require a little bit more conversation with the town manager before I really specify the intent of that conversation. So stay tuned via email on that.
One question, the Chapter 70 meeting, she had a deck. Do we have that?
I
deck?
have not received that yet,
She
so
was gonna-
I did request it, and, yep,
She said she was, yeah.
yep. So we're still due that information. I'll disseminate it when I have it.
So just one comment on one of these meetings, the meeting with the representatives. One thing we might think about, are there legislative cost drivers to the building itself that, if relieved, could reduce the costs? And maybe other towns are doing that. So for example, if we reduced records management in physical
Oh.
copy
Yeah.
requirements, there could be a net savings and probably carbon footprint reductions associated with those kinds of things. So maybe if, people that have thought through this and some of those design drivers could be reduced legislatively, that might be something to bring up to the
It's a good point.
reps.
Yep.
So it was just on my,
Yep, and it'd be good I'll prep them via email if we can get them to confirm on that. Yep, that's a good idea. Okay.
prevailing way, I was thinking of that on the way in.
I harken back to Mr. Rogers' comment at our last meeting about what you can get away with legislatively. I don't know about that one.
We
All
have
right.
bold legislators in this.
Yeah, we do.
That's a challenge.
Buy some more bulletproof vests.
Yeah, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are unanimous. We are adjourned. Good night, everybody.
3 hours.
5 minutes under.
Yeah.
Recording stopped.